When I was a child, my family moved into a semi-detached house in a village called Rossington. I was only a few weeks old at the time, so I don't remember much from that period, but things didn't start getting strange until I was 7. It began with a dark shadow. I first saw it in the corner of the front bedroom. Terrified, I screamed and ran downstairs, but the shadow followed me. It lingered at the top of the stairs, watching, before disappearing into the bathroom just as my mother and stepfather arrived. They searched everywhere but found nothing. My brother tried to claim it was him playing a prank, but he had been downstairs the whole time. A few weeks passed, and the odd occurrences escalated. My brother and I were playing in the house when the doors suddenly slammed shut behind us, one after another, until we were trapped on the top landing. We stood there in shock, staring at the doors. Then, before I could even react, my brother fell down the stairs. He kept insisting, "It pushed me, it pushed me." But I didn't know what he meant. My mother, furious, thought I had caused his fall. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't convince her otherwise. After that, I started experiencing things I couldn't understand. In the middle of the night, I would see a figure hovering outside my bedroom window. A woman, her face scarred and distorted. She didn't move or speak. She just watched me as I drifted off to sleep. On some mornings, I woke up feeling fine. But on other mornings, I would wake up to darkness, seeing only the insides of my eye sockets. Panicked, I'd frantically wash my face and run outside, thinking I was dreaming, only to realize I wasn't. People were staring at me in my underwear, confused by my actions. It was then that my mother started to get suspicious. It seemed like whatever was in the house was targeting me, leaving everyone else alone. Years later, after we moved out of the house, we learned that it had belonged to a couple who died without ever having children. The image of the woman outside my window remained a mystery, something completely separate from the house's history. Now, at 22, I still feel haunted. It's the little things, constant bad dreams and unsettling visions. One particularly disturbing moment was when I dreamed of my grandma's death before it actually happened. I had another dream where my granddad was holding a portrait, saying, "You're not alone." Those were the same words my grandma spoke as she passed. It feels as though something or someone is trying to reach me through my dreams, revealing family secrets I never knew. About a year ago, my mother confessed something that chilled me. She told me that when I was a baby, she saw a shadow hovering over my cot, gently stroking my face before leaping into the neighbor's house. A week later, a relative died. Nowadays, the only paranormal activity I experience is the occasional voice, a whisper right by my ear, saying, "Dad." It's then that I realized something. It wasn't the house that was haunted. It was me. First off, I just want to say that I'm not someone who gets scared easily. Even when this happened, my first thought wasn't OMG, it's definitely a ghost. This incident took place at the start of the Easter holidays. I was walking two adorable Scotty dogs named Bella and Jock, whose owners are friends of my dad. Bella is 2 years old, and Jock is just a 6-month-old puppy. Both of them the friendliest, sweetest dogs you could imagine. They're always full of energy, eager for attention, and they hardly ever bark. That day, it was sunny, with no wind, a perfect day for a walk. Bella and Jock were enthusiastic, playing and running around as we approached the entrance to a wooded area near my home. I'd never really walked through that side of the woods before since I live on the other side, so it felt like a small adventure. At the entrance, we had two options: go left or right. I chose the right path. Everything seemed fine. The dogs were enjoying themselves, and I was soaking in the warm weather. We walked all the way to the end of the path and then turned around to head back. But as we passed the entrance again, things started to feel different. It all began when we found a secluded spot where a woman was sitting by the edge of some trees, next to a pushchair. There was nothing inherently spooky about her. She wasn't a ghost or anything, but something about the way she sat there, looking a bit distant and dazed, made me uneasy. We walked past her and she eventually left. By that time, though, we had hit a dead end, so we had to turn back. This is where things really started to feel off. Jock, who was usually such a playful and confident little pup, suddenly sat down right where the woman had been, shaking and whining. I had never seen him act like this before. It took a while to coax him to move, and even Bella, who's normally energetic, was standing still, her tail tucked between her legs. Once we got moving again, I decided to take the left path. Along the way, I found a small, hidden passage that led to a beautiful grassy area surrounded by trees and flowers. It seemed peaceful, so I sat down with the dogs on my lap. But out of nowhere, Bella and Jock started growling, something they rarely do. They were completely fixated on something, staring intensely. I looked in the direction they were growling at but saw nothing. Just to be sure, I snapped a few photos of the area, hoping to capture whatever they were reacting to. After a while, we moved on and came across another field near the previous grassy area. This time, the dogs were even more scared. Jock refused to move at all, and I had to pick him up to show him there was nothing there. He wasn't convinced, though, and squirmed to get away. I tied them up to a nearby fence and decided to investigate the field on my own, camera in hand. As I walked into the field, I heard rustling in the trees, which was strange because there wasn't any wind. My heart raced a little, but I took more photos, determined to figure out what was going on. Meanwhile, the dogs were growing increasingly restless, scared, and whiny. Finally, I decided it was time to head home. As soon as we left the grassy area, both Bella and Jock seemed to snap back to their usual happy selves, darting around and playing as if nothing had happened. When I got home, I reviewed the photos I had taken. Most of them didn't show anything unusual, but two stood out. One seemed to show an orb, and in another, there was both an orb and a strange, fog-like mist in front of the camera. It definitely creeped me out a bit. I haven't had the chance to walk Bella and Jock since that day, mainly because I've been busy with school and figure skating. But I'm planning to go back to those woods soon, and when I do, I'll be paying extra attention to anything unusual. I have always lived in the same brick house in the East Midlands of England. It must have been built in the 1960s, as my mother had lived here long before I was born, back when she was married. I'm 22 years old now, and while this house is my home and pride, it's also become my worst nightmare. Not too long ago, I finally accepted the reality that the young woman I had often seen pacing the halls and sitting in my bedroom was, in fact, the deceased daughter of the previous occupants. It wasn't just my imagination. My neighbors had sat me down one day and told me all about the poor sickly girl, and how they had seen her too. Despite the numerous witnesses who have experienced her presence in our house, my mother has never believed me. I won't lie, I'm scared of her. She's a ghost, and this is my home, not hers. But she's not the reason I avoid my bedroom and the upstairs landing at night. It's the shadows. Tall men whose faces and torsos disappear into their own dark haze. They consume the staircase, haunting the space. As a child, I'd cry and protest about them interrupting my sleep, tugging at my mattress and curtains, and destroying my toys. Sometimes it feels like they've left, but the oppressive presence remains. More often than not, they return, as if drawn back to the house. I don't know who they are or what they want, and even people who have known this house for years have no knowledge of these shadowy figures. One memory in particular stands out. I was 15 years old, nearing the summer holidays, and it was an unusually humid morning at 5 a.m. I used to have this awful black metal single bed that creaked and groaned with every breath I took. Though I was usually a heavy sleeper, I woke up that morning feeling unusually refreshed. The TV was on, as always. I refused to sleep without it. BBC Two's learning program was playing, and I distinctly remember seeing the logo on the screen. I shifted myself against the bed board, intending to watch TV until I got sleepy again. But without warning, the bottom right-hand corner of the mattress was yanked hard, pulling it diagonally from the frame. Shock hit me immediately. I clung tightly to the bed board, my heart racing as I yelped in terror. Over the years, I'd gotten used to strange things happening, but it was becoming more physical, and this was different. I hesitantly inspected the mattress. The corner had been pulled nearly a foot from the frame. I pushed it back in place and straightened it out, but I noticed something strange. The frame wasn't shaking, but it was vibrating, almost buzzing faintly. I could hear a light clanking sound, too. I thought maybe if I just ignored it and slipped under the covers, it would stop. About 10 minutes later, the vibrations did gradually come to a halt. But then I heard it breathing. It wasn't mine. I could feel the breath in the room, heavy and unsettling. When I was younger, that same breathing had driven me out of my room many nights. Even now, it's something I can't ignore. Most nights, I end up sleeping on the sofa downstairs. That night, the breathing grew heavier and more aggressive, becoming gasping and almost desperate, until I couldn't take it anymore. By the time I turned 22, I had changed my bed multiple times, redesigned my entire room, and tried everything to feel comfortable. But now I have no bed at all. I sleep on a roll-out futon with a sleeping bag when I dare to even enter the room. The sofa bed in the corner of my room has become a permanent fixture, only ever used by my puppets and the little lady spirit who sits by my family shrine. Though I feel somewhat safer downstairs, I'm not entirely free from them here either. Doors open on their own. Strange choking and grunting noises fill the air, and unseen hands rearrange objects. The worst of it happens when they cover your face while you sleep. So why do I put up with it? Because this is my house. Will I ever find out who they are? I'm afraid I'll never know. I moved into my home in 2003. It's a beautiful ground floor, 2-bedroom flat with a garden, and I was thrilled to have a garden of my own. Who wouldn't be? Though it needed some work, I was more than ready to put in the effort. The garden is L-shaped. When you step through the patio doors, you first come to a paved area, followed by the L-shaped section meant for planting. I've attached pictures to give you a better idea. There's also a separate fenced area with grass and trees, and beyond that, a wall that leads down to a river. I honestly couldn't have asked for a nicer space. When we first moved in, though, the garden was a complete jungle. I used to joke with my kids, saying, "I wonder what kind of creatures live in all that mess." Since we moved in during November, we didn't really tackle the garden until March 2004, when the weather started to warm up. It took hours to cut the overgrown grass and yank out the stubborn weeds. My 2 boys and I would squirm every time we had to pull a weed. Who knew what might pop out from the dirt? But, to be fair, we did come across some interesting insects that even fascinated us. After days of hard work, blisters on our hands, and plenty of backaches, we finally got the garden looking presentable. We dug through the soil, which had clearly been neglected for years. We found all kinds of rubbish buried in there. As we transformed that overgrown jungle into a neat, livable space, I never felt anything unusual. I was just excited to have a garden where I could grow flowers, herbs, and grass. Little did I know that peace wouldn't last. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when things started feeling strange. But here's what happened. There are 2 trees in the garden that I can't help but stare at. No matter what time of day or night it is, it's as if I'm being watched from those trees. Whenever I step outside, the first thing I do is look at the tree on the left, and lately I've also found myself staring at the one on the right. Every night, before bed, I have this compulsion to go to the window and look at the tree closest to my bedroom. It feels incomplete if I don't. My son and I used to call our cat Inky through that same window in the evenings. But after sunset, we stopped. Both of us have felt an eerie sensation, as if someone or something is approaching. My son even said, "I'm not doing that again. There's someone out there." Despite all my attempts, I've never been able to get anything to grow in that garden. No flowers, no herbs. This baffled me for years. On warm days, I'll sit in the garden, but I know I'm not alone. I often hear the sound of leaves crunching, like someone is walking on them. It's unsettling. Last month, I decided to give planting another go. I started clearing away the leaves that seemed to always gather near the fence. Digging the soil was hard work, exhausting to say the least. I only managed to do a quarter of the garden. I planted sunflowers, herbs in one section, and vegetables in another. Just recently, I noticed that some of the herbs are actually starting to grow, and I think I see the first shoots of flowers poking through. Inky, my cat, has always been drawn to the same spots in the garden as me. But lately, he's been playing near the trees and hiding around them more than usual. 2 days ago, I got home from work, opened the garden door, and called out for Inky, expecting him to come running from his usual hiding spot. But to my surprise, I found him sitting near the tree on the right, with a beautiful ginger cat. Both of them just sat there, perfectly still. The ginger cat looked right at me, as if it understood when I called its name. Then, just as quickly as they appeared, they were both gone. A few years ago, when I was around 13 or 14, my school went through what I like to call the infamous Ouija board phase. I don't know if this is something many schools experience, but where I live, it seemed like we went from being obsessed with Pokemon cards to groups of kids huddled together in classrooms with Ouija boards. Before diving into the story, here's a bit of background about my school. It's old Victorian at the very least. It's a private boarding school, and over the years, there have been a few accidental deaths. For instance, one child tragically died after choking on a pen lid, and another boy jumped to his death from the bell tower. There are numerous ghost stories tied to the school, but they aren't particularly relevant here. Let's just say it wasn't hard to believe that the place might be haunted. At some point during year 8, I found myself in a classroom with a group of girls who were completely serious about using a Ouija board. They started by saying the Lord's Prayer before asking the usual questions like, "Is there anyone in the room with us?" And, "Is there anybody there?" Eventually, we got a response, "Yes." We continued, asking if the spirit was male or female. The pointer moved to male. At that point, everyone started accusing each other of moving the pointer on purpose. It seemed like the usual skepticism and teasing that comes with these things. Then one of the girls, unable to contain herself any longer, burst out laughing and confessed, "It was me. I moved the pointer." Her friends laughed too, and the tension broke. It all felt like typical schoolgirl mischief. I decided I had better things to do and left the circle, figuring the whole thing was just a joke. For a while, I didn't think about the Ouija board again. But later that day, Amy, one of the girls from the group, came running up to me, looking genuinely worried. She told me that after I left, things had gotten more intense. I laughed and asked her what kind of stuff had happened. She looked at me dead serious and said, "It was talking about evil spirits and making threats." I tried to brush it off as more fooling around, but then she said something that made me pause. It said it wanted to throw me down the stairs. Her fear was palpable. I tried to reassure her, telling her that it was probably just someone else moving the pointer again, but the look on her face stayed with me for the rest of the day. Now, I've had my own moments where I felt a presence or sensed something was going to happen before it did. But in that classroom, I didn't feel anything unusual before I left. So, I put the whole incident out of my mind. That is, until 3 days later when Amy fell down the stairs and broke her leg. I was completely shocked. According to her, no one was near her when she fell, and she swore that she had been pushed. Now, here's where I need your opinion. Do you think this was the work of a demon or spirit, as the Ouija board had seemingly foretold? Or do you think it was something psychological, like a placebo effect, where she might have scared herself so much that she subconsciously made herself fall? When I was about 15 years old, my dad became the manager of a pub. I won't say which one, as he doesn't run it anymore, but it was located near Sheffield on a country road. The pub had been converted from an old farmhouse and barn, and to reach it, you had to turn off the road and follow a small track about half a mile until you arrived at the car park. The first night we stayed there, each of us slept in different rooms since the pub also doubled as a small hotel with 6 rooms spread over 2 floors. That night, I stayed in room number 3. As we were all settling down for bed, our family dog, an imposing Rottweiler with a head like a boulder, refused to leave my room. My dad was shouting at him to leave, but the dog just lay there on the carpet, unwilling to budge. Eventually, the dog did go out to the corridor, but the moment my dad closed his door, I quietly opened mine and let the dog back in. He wasn't just big, he was usually fearless. But that night, he seemed desperate to stay close to me, like he didn't want to be alone. At the time, my parents were divorced and I only saw my dad on the weekends. On another visit, I stayed in room number 4. To give you a sense of the layout, if you stepped out of room number 4, to the right was an emergency exit with a push bar leading to the fire escape stairs, and to the left was a staircase going up to my dad's room and a spare room that was mainly used for storage. From the start, I felt uneasy in that room. I didn't want to turn off the lights and kept the TV on as long as I could. It wasn't until 3 a.m. that I finally turned off the TV. though I left the lights on. That night, my dad had started leaving the dog downstairs in the pub area, blocking the door leading to the bedrooms. He didn't want dog hair getting into the rooms since he was preparing to let guests stay in them. But the dog was barking like crazy, non-stop. I was far too scared to go downstairs to check what was going on. Suddenly, I heard the emergency exit door outside my room start rattling, as if someone was trying to push it open but not hard enough to get through. Next, I heard loud footsteps thundering down the stairs from my dad's room, followed by shadows passing under my door. I felt a wave of relief, assuming my dad had gone downstairs to check on the dog. The next morning, I casually asked my dad what the dog had been barking at the night before when he went downstairs. His answer sent shivers down my spine. He said he hadn't heard the dog barking at all and hadn't gone downstairs during the night. Later, I learned through research that a woman had fallen down those very stairs many years ago, breaking her neck and dying instantly. That wasn't the last strange thing to happen. My dad's partner, her son, and I came home one night to find the pub in total darkness, which wasn't unusual as the lights often went out on their own. My dad, who had been an electrical engineer before managing the pub, couldn't figure out why this kept happening. That night, the pub was closed, so we had a quick look around to make sure no one had broken in. As we scanned the small restaurant area, we spotted a man sitting at one of the tables at the back, just staring at us. He was solid black, his figure distinct, even as the rest of the room slowly brightened, the flowers on the tables, the chairs, but he remained dark and motionless. Panicked, we ran upstairs and stayed in one of the rooms until the lights came back on. The next morning, we checked everything. Nothing was missing, and the doors were all still locked. It definitely wasn't a burglar. The kitchen, which had once been the old barn, was the worst part of the pub. You always felt like someone was watching you, and it wasn't a friendly feeling. It felt like whoever or whatever was there didn't want you around. My dad had waitresses and bar staff quit because they couldn't stand being in there alone. After some more research, we discovered that the farmer who used to live on the property had hanged himself in the barn, which was now the kitchen. It seemed like he hadn't left. Objects would go missing, spoons would turn up bent out of shape, and no matter how hot the cookers were, the room was always freezing. We had to wear jumpers just to stay warm. One time, my stepbrother and a family friend were staying in room number 7, the storage room. During the night, one of them, Neil, thought that the other, Jim, had gotten up and was leaning over him, checking to see if he was okay. Jim, however, had the exact same experience, thinking Neil was standing over him. The next morning, they realized neither of them had gotten up during the night, but both had seen a figure standing above them. Other strange things happened, like a football rolling down the length of the pub and stopping just a foot away from where my stepbrother and I were sitting. No one else was around. The back door to the pub was always locked at night, but every morning we'd find it wide open, even though the lock was still in the locked position. The bar that secures the door would still be sticking out, yet the door would somehow be open. There was no way it could have opened on its own. The lock was brand new and undamaged. But this kept happening, especially during the month before my dad finally moved out. Eventually, my dad gave up the pub. His partner didn't want to stay there any longer, and the dog, who had once been fearless, was never the same. Over time, the dog did start to recover after we left, but it took a while. My name is Sorka, pronounced Sorsha. It's a somewhat rare Irish name. I've been wanting to share this story online for a while, but I needed to find a place that values reality over fiction. What I'm about to tell you is, to the best of my knowledge, true. The only alternative is that my entire family has been playing a hoax on me since I was 7, which I highly doubt. First, a little context. Though I've always been fascinated by the paranormal, I seem to be about as sensitive to it as a roll of wallpaper. As a child, I had several strange experiences, more so when I was younger. But since I turned 12, I've had nothing worth mentioning, much to my disappointment. The story I'm about to tell took place when I was just 3 years old, so I don't remember any of it firsthand. Instead, my sister, who is 6 years older than me, and my parents have recounted it in varying levels of detail. My mother enjoys telling it, while my father, quietly superstitious, will only talk about it after a few beers. My sister, on the other hand, downplays it as if it's no big deal, perhaps sibling rivalry at play. So settle in, it's a bit of a long story. When I was young, my family, my parents, sister, brother, and I took annual summer trips. We live in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and would travel to places like Portrush, Portstewart, Donaghadee, or Donegal. Anywhere with a nice coast and a good ice cream shop. In the summer of 1990, we headed to Donegal. I was 3, my brother was 6, and my sister was 9. I still remember that my brother was terribly prone to travel sickness, an unfortunate reality that didn't subside until his teenage years. Our trips were often punctuated by roadside stops to let him recover, if we were lucky. By the time we reached Donegal, my brother's medication had worn off, so my dad stopped at a chemist's to pick up more travel sickness pills. Relieved to stretch our legs, we all piled into the shop. As a toddler, I had platinum blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a chubby little face that seemed to draw attention. Adults would often gush over me, and I wasn't one to mind. The woman behind the counter was no exception. While her coworker helped my mum find the medication, this brunette lady came over to chat with my dad and me. She asked the usual small talk questions, where we were from, how long we were staying, and what our plans were. Dad mentioned that we were headed to the beach after checking into our bed and breakfast, and she seemed to take a special interest in me as I played near the counter. With our purchase in hand, we left the shop and continued our journey. But barely 10 minutes later, my brother, as expected, announced that he felt sick again. If you've ever had a sibling like this, you know the kind of panic that sets in. My parents sprang into action. Bags were quickly handed out. I was shifted onto my sister's lap, and we tried to get as far away from him as possible in the cramped car. Soon, my mum spotted an old, decrepit graveyard up ahead. Thinking it might be an interesting distraction, my dad pulled over, and we all got out to explore. Now, as a toddler, I had a bad habit of taking what my parents called mad dashes. I'd run off in random directions without warning, which earned me more than a few smacks because I didn't understand road safety yet. So, it's no surprise that after about 20 minutes of wandering around the graveyard, I made my move and dashed off into the distance. My family, somewhat distracted, took a few minutes to realize I was gone. What happened during those minutes remains a mystery. No one knows what was going through my 3-year-old mind, and I don't remember any of it. After about 10 minutes of frantic searching, my parents found me. What they saw left them uneasy. I was clinging tightly to a knee-high statue of an angel on top of a headstone, and when my dad tried to pick me up, I screamed and refused to let go. My parents tried to coax me away, but I wouldn't budge, so they had to wait until I got bored. Eventually, I let go and said, "It's okay." She says it's okay now. At the time, my parents didn't think much of it. They assumed it was just toddler babbling. But as my dad bent down to pick me up, he glanced at the headstone. It was a little girl's grave. Her name had been Sorka, and she had died on that exact date over 100 years ago. She had been 3 years old. My dad, quietly superstitious, freaked out. The rest of my family had mixed reactions. My brother didn't care much. My sister brushed it off as a coincidence, but my mum thought it was eerie in a cool way. My dad, though, was visibly shaken. We packed up quickly and headed to our destination. He wouldn't take us to the beach that day as planned, insisting we wait until tomorrow. We spent the rest of the day in a state of uneasy calm, with my dad watching me closely, almost as if expecting something to happen. The next few days passed uneventfully. We never did make it to the beach because the weather turned sour, typical Irish summer. Soon, it was time to head home, with my brother's travel sickness predictably acting up again. As we neared the chemist's on the way back, my mum insisted we stop so she could grab some painkillers, probably for a headache, though she'll never admit it was hangover-related. My dad was carrying me when we walked in, and immediately, the brunette lady from before rushed over to us. She looked relieved, almost emotional, and started smoothing down my hair. "Oh, thank God," she said, over and over, clearly upset. My dad, confused and uncomfortable, asked her what was wrong. She explained, "The day you were here and said you were going to the beach, a father and his little girl were washed off the shore and drowned. I was sure it was you." To this day, my parents believe that had we gone to the beach that day, we would have been the ones caught in the freak wave and drowned. Maybe my odd behavior with the statue saved us. Maybe it was just an incredible coincidence. All I know is that whenever I tell this story, I can't help but get emotional, even though I don't remember any of it. I'm not particularly religious, though I consider myself spiritual. But every now and then, my mum will say a quiet prayer for the other Sorka. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. From the time I was a baby until I turned 16, we lived in the same house. It was an incredibly warm and friendly place, and although there were some strange happenings, they were never threatening. When I was around 3 or 4 years old, I had 2 imaginary friends named Fred and Sheila. Apparently, I would babble to them constantly, though I only have one specific memory of them. I remember sitting in my cot and seeing them kneeling beside it, looking in. I don't recall much detail, just their eyes watching me. My mother told me that I often mentioned Fred and Sheila, and one day she asked what they looked like. From whatever I described in my childlike way, she gathered that I was describing a man in some kind of uniform and a woman in an outfit from the 1940s. Given her interest in history and genealogy, she decided to research the house's history. She discovered that during the wartime, a couple had lived there, and the husband had been a soldier. I don't remember if she said their names were Fred and Sheila, but the connection was enough to make us wonder, was I interacting with past inhabitants? Or did I just have an unusually vivid imagination? Throughout our time in that house, odd things would happen. Objects would go missing and turn up in strange places. Sometimes appliances would turn themselves on, voices would echo through the air, and you'd feel someone walking past or entering the room, even when you were alone. Occasionally, I'd get the sense that someone was watching me. Despite all this, nothing ever felt sinister. In fact, many visitors would comment on how warm and welcoming the house felt. One of the only things that ever unsettled me was a recurring sensation of being chased up the stairs when no one was there. A friend's mum once told me that it might be my guardian angel and that I shouldn't feel scared. That advice helped ease my nerves, though I couldn't shake the feeling entirely. There were a couple of other odd moments. Once, while in the attic room, I saw a small black mass emerge from one of the cupboards. It was brief but enough to stick with me. There was also something about the fireplaces that made me uncomfortable. The house had 3 floors, and each floor had a fireplace in the same spot. Standing near them gave me an uneasy feeling, but apart from that, none of the strange happenings ever really bothered us. Whatever was in the house, it didn't seem harmful. I don't think it was just one presence, and certainly nothing had any ill intentions toward us. After we moved out, my parents' friends moved in. They've had their own strange experiences, but like us, they haven't found anything particularly scary. The only unnerving incident they've mentioned is when a relative came to visit, and out of nowhere, her glass shattered in her hand for no apparent reason. I've only visited the house once since we moved, and the atmosphere didn't feel the same to me. I'm not sure if that's because something changed, or simply because it's no longer my home. I was very fortunate as a child to travel to places my friends had only heard about. Thanks to my parents, that love for traveling has stayed with me my whole life. My mother grew up in England, so we often vacationed there. One particular summer when I was 14, we spent July and August in England. My parents rented a house in a small village near Warwick. The house was small and whitewashed, with a large wooden door and a beautiful English garden. Inside, it was sparsely furnished but cozy. My brother and I shared a room upstairs, right across the landing from the master bedroom and the washroom. If you looked out from my bed, you could see into both rooms at once. The house itself didn't seem out of the ordinary, just a nice place to call home for the summer. It was built in the mid to late 1800s, but aside from its age, I didn't feel anything strange, except for one thing. In the washroom, there was a large white door in the corner that led to a storage area where the water heater was kept. For some reason, that door made me feel uneasy, but I chalked it up to just being a scared teenager. One night, my brother decided to go explore the nearby farms with our parents, but I was too tired and stayed home. After some TV and snacks, I got ready for bed. As I washed my face in the washroom, that large white door loomed behind me in the mirror. I ignored the uneasy feeling, turned off the lights, and went to bed. I left the small sconce on in the landing, just in case I needed to get up during the night. It had an old pull cord to turn it on and off. As I lay in bed, I noticed it suddenly got brighter in the house. The kitchen light was on. I assumed my family had come back, but there were no sounds, no talking, no tea being made, just silence. I decided to investigate. When I went downstairs, the kitchen was empty, and all the doors and windows were locked. Puzzled, I turned off the kitchen light and went back upstairs. But now the washroom light was on, and to my horror, the large white door was wide open. I stood frozen, staring into the dark room behind the door. Overwhelmed by fear, I ran into the washroom, slammed the door shut, and quickly went back to bed. I started to calm down, but just as I began to doze off, I heard something. A sound I still can't explain, filled me with dread. I rolled over and looked into the washroom. The door was wide open again. Terrified, I jumped out of bed, turned on the washroom light, slammed the door shut, and wedged the ironing board against it to keep it closed. I ran back to my room, but things got worse. The large white door rattled slightly, and the ironing board fell to the floor. The washroom light flickered, then went out, followed by the sconce in the landing, as if someone had pulled the cord. Then my bedroom light flickered, and I heard a voice, a sobbing voice, as if it was coming from inside my head. I was crying now, too, as the sobbing turned into a loud wail. I covered my ears and asked to be left alone. The sobbing grew louder, and the lights continued flickering, until I heard my little brother singing outside. The voice stopped, and the lights came back on. I ran downstairs, crying, into my mother's arms. I started to tell her about the lights and the voice, but I stopped. She wouldn't believe me, so I told her it was just a nightmare. She stroked my hair and reassured me that everything was fine now that they were home. My brother teased me, and we all laughed, but inside, I was still terrified. The next morning, my mother didn't feel well, so my dad took my brother and me sightseeing. When we returned that evening, my mother was sitting outside, pale and shaken. My dad told us to stay in the car while he spoke with her. They argued, and then my dad rushed inside the house. My mother calmly told us we'd be staying at a hotel that night. My brother whined, but when my mother looked at me, I knew why we were leaving. She had seen something, too. We left that small whitewashed house near Warwick and never went back. These events happened early one morning, all within the span of an hour, right in my own home. Last week, my friend Kate stayed over, and we were both sleeping on the living room floor. I woke up at 5 a.m., needing tissue paper for my cold, so I went to the downstairs toilet. I left the door slightly ajar, planning to go back out right away. As I grabbed some tissue, I suddenly heard a man's voice say, "Hello!" It wasn't loud, but it was demanding and husky, as if it was coming from right outside the door. Startled, I thought it might be one of my brothers or my dad, since they sometimes suffer from insomnia. But the voice didn't sound like any of them. I replied, "Hello?" But there was no response. Confused, I stepped out of the toilet and checked the hallway, the study next to the toilet, and the kitchen across from it. No one was there. I knew I would have heard someone moving around since the wooden floor and stairs creaked loudly, but there was nothing. Feeling uneasy, I went back to the living room and lay down, trying to sleep. What happened next made me feel like I was losing my mind. As I lay on the floor, I saw a small, bright orange light appear on the wall about 3 meters away. It moved slowly, about 30 centimeters to the right, then disappeared back into the wall. Moments later, 3 larger, dimmer white lights appeared on the ceiling. They moved faster than the orange one and vanished into the wall, one after the other. By now, I was terrified. My legs felt paralyzed, and I struggled to breathe, which I'm sure was from the fear. I had an overwhelming sense that a man was standing at the foot of my makeshift bed. And then, more strange things happened. I started hearing a beeping sound, like a heart monitor, but it wasn't steady. It would stop for a split second or go out of pace, but it definitely wasn't coming from anything in the house, like the dishwasher. When my dad's alarm went off at 6 a.m., I quickly went upstairs and waited for him to leave for work. After he left, I sat on my mom's bed before finally settling in my brother's room to sleep. But despite being in a different room, I felt freezing and couldn't sleep, even though the rest of the house seemed perfectly fine. All of this happened within the span of an hour. My grandfather passed away a few years ago from lung cancer, which came on suddenly. He had been improving but died unexpectedly in the hospital. I never got the chance to see him before he passed, and sometimes I wonder if that was for the best since I don't have a final image of him in the hospital. Occasionally, I catch the overwhelming smell of tobacco in the house. Not like someone is smoking, but a strong, heavy scent that fills the room. It's freaky but also comforting at the same time. I'm convinced that my grandfather checks up on me and my auntie, his daughter, every now and again. I've always believed in ghosts. As a child, I'm sure I saw them in my old house every night, though sometimes I wonder if it was just my imagination. Death has always fascinated me. I've become all too familiar with it, both its sadness and the strange, captivating allure it holds. Over the years, I've dived deep into researching the paranormal in every way possible. Reading books, searching online, practicing rituals, watching paranormal shows, and even visiting the most haunted places in my hometown. The unknown is intriguing, and I've always wished to experience something beyond the ordinary. I had often dreamed of living in a haunted house, not one filled with demons or angry spirits, but one where restless spirits wandered, their somber presences a mystery to uncover. I never expected that I'd fall in love with one. Maybe it was my obsession with haunted locations, or maybe I unknowingly invited him into my life. It started one day after I came home from school, dropping my backpack onto the kitchen chair like always. As I turned the chair to face the window, something strange happened. Another chair, across from me, slid out on its own and turned to face me. I froze, terrified. My first instinct was to run, but instead, I gripped the front door handle, feeling the shock of what I had just witnessed. Despite my fear, something made me go back. I sat down in the kitchen again, staring at the empty chair, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then I saw it, a hazy outline, slowly forming in front of me. The longer I stared, the clearer it became. It was the form of a teenage boy no older than me. And then, just as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. Later that night, as I sat on my bed flipping through TV channels, I felt a sudden chill around my waist. It was as if someone had wrapped their arms around me, holding me gently. The sensation was cold but comforting, almost like sitting in someone's lap. I didn't feel afraid. In fact, I liked it. The cold embrace lasted for about 5 minutes before it suddenly disappeared, leaving no trace. I whispered into the darkness, asking him to stay, but he didn't return for the rest of the month. It wasn't until a month and a half later that he made his presence known again. I was sitting in my room, reading, when I felt a cold pressure on my wrist, as if someone was gently holding it down. Startled, I looked up and saw him, clearly this time. He was a teenage boy, maybe a year or two older than me, with bushy black hair and hazy green eyes. His pale, pointed face had an air of calm mystery about it. A name echoed in my mind, Jacques. Before I could process what was happening, he leaned forward and kissed me. His lips were cold, and the kiss itself was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was oddly beautiful, and I found myself enjoying it more than I ever thought I would. After a few seconds, the sensation faded, and he disappeared again. Jacques has been around ever since. A few days ago, I came home, worried that my mother would notice my unmade bed. But when I got to my room, I found it tidy, the bed made perfectly, though not in the way I or my mom would have made it. I assumed my mom had done it, but when I spoke to her, she thanked me for cleaning my room and even complimented the bed-making style. That's when I realized Jacques had done it. As if to confirm my thoughts, a cold breeze passed by my arm, carrying with it a feeling of smug satisfaction. I recently moved from Anglesey to Chester because my dad decided to study philosophy at Chester University. Even though I'm now in a new place, I've never forgotten the unsettling feeling from my old house. It was partly an old house built about 100 years ago, with many people having lived there before us, and another part had an extension added about 10 years ago. It was the older part of the house where I always felt unwelcome. One day I saw her, a little girl standing next to the toilet as I was running a bath. She was pale and gray, with an expressionless face that seemed almost carved from stone. I can't explain exactly how she looked, but her presence sent chills down my spine. I got used to seeing her at odd times. She always appeared with that same emotionless glare. I never thought she would hurt me, but I knew, somehow, she didn't want me there. Every time I saw her, I ran out of the room, terrified. Her expression spoke volumes. She wasn't happy about me living in that house. One morning, my 2-year-old sister was crying at her stair gate. The sound was unbearable, so I got up to let her in. As I reached the gate, I froze. There, standing near her, was a black figure tall with oily, wax-like skin. It looked like it was melting. Its claws were stretched out, reaching for my sister. She was staring at it, sobbing, while I stood there in shock. The figure turned to look at me, and just like that, it vanished. I opened the gate, grabbed my sister, and ran straight into my dad's room, crying. I told him everything in vivid detail, just like I'm telling you now. He didn't say much, but I knew he had his own experiences with the paranormal, and that made me feel safe around him. Things only got stranger after that. I had small crazy bone figures on top of my TV in my room, and one day they suddenly flew up into the air, as if they were being tossed around by something invisible. I ran out of the room again, too scared to stay. From that point on, there was constant poltergeist activity in the house. I avoided my room as much as I could, sleeping in the lounge or with my dad. Eventually, I just accepted that my room wasn't safe. But one day, my auntie came over with my cousin and her friend, and they were curious about the strange things I'd been seeing. I wanted to show them that something was really happening, so I made a makeshift dowsing rod from a wire hanger, like the kind paranormal investigators use. Holding it lightly, I asked the spirit for a sign, and the hanger suddenly pointed straight to my room. We were in the lounge, right below my room, and I could feel the fear rising in all of us. I handed the hanger to my cousin. It did the same for her. She started laughing nervously, but I could tell she was scared. My auntie tried it, and the same thing happened. They were all freaked out, and I knew then that I wasn't imagining any of it. My dad, ever the skeptic, said it was nothing and told us to take it upstairs. We all went together, and sure enough, the hanger kept pointing towards my room. My cousin was too scared to sleep in there after that, and neither did anyone else. That night, we all crammed into my dad's room to sleep, not wanting to be alone. This is not fake. I swear on my life. Now, my mom still lives in Anglesey, and I'm planning to visit her on Friday. My friend and I are thinking about sneaking into the old house, maybe even doing a little investigation of our own. We're older now and understand more, but I'm still not sure what we might find. It was around 5 p.m., and I was in the kitchen cleaning, the daylight just starting to fade. My boyfriend was out at a friend's place, and my dog, Bert, was nagging me to play. I gently pushed his face away as I bent down to grab a bottle of bleach from the cupboard. Suddenly, Bert yelped, and I heard a quick, low laugh. A single ha! That made me jump. I hit my head hard on the cupboard and spun around, startled, to see Bert's ball rolling from the hallway straight to my feet. That was the first bizarre thing. I knew for a fact that his ball had been in my coat pocket, hanging by the front door. I always take it with me when I walk him. Bert bolted toward the kitchen's back door, whining to be let out. I didn't let him out, though. It was raining, and I just cleaned the carpet. The laugh had unnerved me, but I tried to brush it off as someone passing by outside. The ball rolling toward me was just a coincidence, right? But then Bert yelped again, springing up from where he'd been sulking by the door. I was nowhere near him, yet he turned and growled at me, completely out of character for my gentle giant. This time, instead of calming down, he started barking wildly, but not at me, at something behind me. I'll admit, I didn't feel anything odd at first. Sure, I was cold, but it's always freezing in my kitchen. I cautiously approached Bert. I know, maybe foolish, but he's my dog. He'd never hurt me. The moment I touched his face, he went quiet, though his eyes stayed fixed on something behind me. That's when the cupboard door, which I'd left open, slowly creaked shut on its own. Inside, I heard the distinct clunk of a bottle shifting. A sharp throb hit my head, and a wave of nausea washed over me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw two quick flashes of light down the hallway, near where I'd seen a figure before. I heard a soft sigh, a deep breath, almost, and then, after sitting on the floor with Bert whimpering in my lap, the nausea faded, and I miraculously felt fine. I've had migraines before, but this was different. It was the second time I'd experienced a brief, intense headache while standing in that same spot. I'd seen the strange lights before, too. The first time was by my bedroom window after something woke me up. The next day, I went to some lengths to check things out. I made a doctor's appointment to see if this was migraine-related, though I was starting to doubt it. We had recently cleared Bert of fleas, and after checking him for any injuries or tender spots that could have caused his yelps, I found nothing. And as for the missing bottle of bleach, it turned up under the spare bedroom's bed. For 18 years, I've lived in this house, never having experienced anything like this. I've always thought of myself as someone not particularly sensitive to the paranormal. Sure, I've always been interested in it, but I was more of a casual observer, never really expecting to encounter anything firsthand. But now, with everything happening, I can't help but wonder why all of this is suddenly happening to me. Maybe, in my eagerness to find proof of life after death, I've unlocked something dormant within myself. But now, as these experiences keep happening, I'm beginning to think that maybe ignorance really is bliss, or at least peace. I've always had some doubts when it comes to people claiming they've seen ghosts or had paranormal experiences. I believed it might be possible, but with so many made-up stories out there, it was hard for me to figure out what was real. So, when the following events took place, I was left completely shaken. I was 17 at the time, and it was the middle of summer just a few years ago, really. I lived in New Haven, a small town near Brighton on the south coast of England. It was one of those scorching hot days, and I remember my dad and stepmom had taken my younger brothers out shopping, while my older brothers were out on their own. That left me and my boyfriend, who I'm still with, by the way, alone at home, just lazing around. We were in a 2-floor, 4-bedroom house, which my stepmom always insisted had spirits. Earlier that day, my dad asked my boyfriend to store a few things in the loft, which he did. But I remember he left the loft door open, a detail that sticks with me now for reasons I'll explain soon. My boyfriend got bored after a while and decided to head into town to rent a movie and pick up some lunch. I didn't feel like going, so I stayed behind, playing with my kitten, Breezer, in my room. Willow, my border collie, was asleep just outside my room on the landing. She never came into any of the bedrooms unless invited, as my dad had trained her not to. So there I was, alone in the house with Breezer on my bed and Willow outside the door. As I lay on my back, playing with Breezer, I suddenly heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Boots, to be exact, the kind my boyfriend always wore. It wasn't unusual, so I figured he had forgotten something and come back. I turned my head to watch him come up the stairs, but to my surprise, no one was there. Instead, Willow, who was never allowed inside without permission, bolted into my room, whimpering and cowered by my bed. This was so unlike her. Concerned, I started to sit up, but that's when it happened. Something pushed me back down, a hand covering my eyes. I struggled, thinking maybe my boyfriend had somehow come back and was playing a joke on me. But deep down, I knew he wasn't there. I felt hands around my neck, squeezing tightly. I screamed out, "This isn't funny," and then began begging, "Please, don't hurt me." What did I do? The pressure around my neck tightened as I lay there for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. The pain was real, and the fear was overwhelming. When the grip finally loosened, I opened my eyes, but no one was there. I was terrified. Breezer was still on my bed, hissing and spitting, his fur standing on end, and Willow was lying flat on the floor, motionless, too scared to move. I immediately called my boyfriend, sobbing so hard he could barely understand me. He rushed home in a cab and was back in minutes. When he saw me, he was visibly upset and told me I needed to look in the mirror. I did, and I was horrified. Around my neck were deep red marks shaped like fingers. Over the next few days, they darkened into deep purple bruises. It was so hard to explain to my dad that my boyfriend hadn't hurt me because he wasn't even there. I still don't know what happened that day or why it happened. All I know is that something not of this world, attacked me. The experience left me shaken, and I've never been able to make sense of it. What makes it even stranger is that this wasn't an isolated event. A few months later, I was physically attacked again, this time with my boyfriend present. The attack was so violent that it broke his wrist. I can't say for sure what triggered these events, but I've wondered if my boyfriend disturbed something in the loft when he left the door open that day. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. A quick recap of my old house. It was a 2-story, 4-bedroom home in New Haven, a small town outside of Brighton on the south coast of England. If you've read my other story about being physically hurt, you'll understand where I think the spirit came from. We believe my boyfriend disturbed something when he was putting things in the loft and accidentally left the hatch open. Now, this time when we were attacked, we weren't even living near that house anymore. By then, we had moved to London, but we were visiting my family and staying in the front room downstairs since all the bedrooms were occupied. Let me try to explain the layout so it makes sense when I describe what happened. One of the sofas was positioned flat against the wall, with one end also against another wall, kind of like a corner. The front room didn't have a door. There was a door frame, but the door had been removed to create more space. Opposite the front room door, there was another doorway leading into the open-plan kitchen and dining room, so you could see across the hallway and into the other room from where we were sitting. My boyfriend was leaning back on the sofa, his left leg stretched along the seat and his right leg bent with his foot on the floor. I was sitting between his legs, leaning back on his chest. His left arm was behind his head, and his right arm was wrapped around me. We were asleep. I remember waking up, feeling wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, and goosebumps covered my skin. A deep sense of fear hit me, the kind that twists your gut and tells you something is very, very wrong. I lay there, holding my breath, listening to every little sound. I was terrified, and I could feel that something bad was about to happen. Willow, our dog, came into the room and sat down beside me. Animals are sensitive to this kind of stuff, so I thought maybe she was just reacting to how scared I was. She seemed restless, but I was too scared to turn and look at her. After a few minutes, I thought, this is dumb. I shifted my position, lying on my back with my boyfriend's stomach pressed against mine. Willow laid down flat beside the sofa, her head down, which seemed odd because I hadn't even petted her yet. Then my boyfriend's arm around me suddenly tightened. At first, I thought he was just moving in his sleep, but the pressure around my chest kept getting tighter. I told him, "Get off, man, what are you doing?" He muttered something about leaving his arm alone, still half asleep, but then the grip on my chest got even tighter, and his arm moved to my neck. That's when he woke up fully and said, in a shaky voice, "That's not me. I'm not doing that." Fear rushed through me. I knew without a doubt that it was the same thing as before, the same presence that had attacked me in the past. My boyfriend started moaning in pain, begging, "Please, get off my arm." His arm was still around my neck, so I grabbed it and pushed it away, but it felt like something was pushing it back toward me. To explain it clearly, imagine holding your arm out in front of you as if you were hugging someone and they pushed your arm away from them. Normally, your arm would just move, right? But now imagine something on the other side pushing your arm back toward them. That's exactly what was happening. I was pushing his arm away from me, but something was pushing it back toward my neck. My boyfriend's voice became frantic, and the pressure around his arm kept increasing until, snap, his wrist broke in my hands. I heard the crack, and in that moment, everything stopped. The presence vanished instantly. The room no longer felt heavy or oppressive, and the fear lifted just as quickly as it had come. People upstairs had started to stir from all the shouting, and they rushed downstairs to see what was going on. We tried to explain, and then we headed straight to the hospital. Even though I feel guilty for pushing his arm, my boyfriend doesn't blame me. He told me he would have done the same if it were me being attacked. But I can't help but wonder, would things have gone that far if I hadn't stood up to whatever it was? Maybe I shouldn't have tried to fight back. Maybe if I had stayed quiet, the spirit would have just left us with bruises. I'll never know for sure. But what I do know is that the moment my boyfriend's wrist snapped, the spirit left, and the room was peaceful again. My dog Jez died in 2005, and it was one of the hardest moments of my life. She was only 6 years old, a staff by breed but a softie at heart. Jazz was incredibly friendly, especially with children, and losing her to a brain tumor broke my heart. She passed away on September 23rd, a date that's burned into my memory. I've always believed in the paranormal. It's been a big part of my life for as long as I can remember. A couple of days after Jazz passed, I was feeling overwhelmed with sadness, knowing I wouldn't be seeing her for a long time. I went to bed early that night and, in my grief, I asked her to visit me, whether in spirit or in a dream, just so I could say goodbye one last time. Looking back, I wish I hadn't made that request. What happened next is something skeptics would probably dismiss as sleep paralysis, but I'm convinced it was something more. I had never experienced sleep paralysis before that night, and I haven't since. As I lay in bed, I suddenly heard a strange buzzing noise, and I couldn't move. My heart was racing, and although the experience only lasted a few seconds, it felt like hours. I was completely frozen, terrified for my life. I remember desperately trying to reach out to my boyfriend beside me, hoping he could help me, but I couldn't move a muscle. I don't know exactly what I called into my life that night, but I learned a valuable lesson. Be careful what you wish for, because it just might come true. Fast forward to 2006, after the birth of my daughter. Oddly enough, just like after my son was born in 2001, I started seeing strange things in the house. Shadows would pass by the doorway, catching my attention every time. I saw these figures almost daily, but only when my kids were babies. It was as if they lingered until my children reached a certain age, and then they disappeared. One night, when my daughter was just a month old, I had a particularly unsettling experience. I had laid her down on the sofa after she woke up for a feed, and I went to the bathroom. As soon as I sat down, I heard a voice say, "What?" At first, I thought it was my daughter kicking the sofa, but that was just wishful thinking. The voice freaked me out because it mimicked something I used to ask her all the time when she cried, "What's the matter?" I panicked so much that I nearly kicked the bedroom door off its hinges trying to get out of there. My boyfriend didn't believe me, of course, he's a skeptic. But I can honestly say, I've never been more frightened in my life. Then, last year, I had another strange encounter. My daughter, being the little handful that she was, often woke up in the middle of the night. On this particular night, I was at my wit's end, exhausted and desperate for sleep. She had been crying for what felt like hours, and I had to step out of the room for a moment of peace. Suddenly, I heard voices coming from the living room where she was, and I went to investigate. To my surprise, the TV had switched on by itself. My daughter was just as shocked as I was. There was no way she could have turned it on herself. The remote was nowhere near her, and I would have heard the noise it made if she had pushed the button. The strange thing is, whoever or whatever turned the TV on that night did me a favor. My daughter stopped crying immediately. Since then, things have been quiet around the house, and honestly, that's just the way I like it. Something happened to me 2 nights ago that has really unsettled me. About a month ago, I had my first experience of what I thought was sleep paralysis. I'd been out drinking with friends and had a big argument with my, then, boyfriend, who could be pretty aggressive. The fight had left me shaken, but eventually, I drifted off to sleep. Sometime later, I woke up, unable to move. There wasn't any pressure on my body, but I was paralyzed, and I could see my ex lying next to me, talking. It was terrifying because I knew he wasn't really there, but it felt so vivid. I don't remember everything he said, but I do recall him telling me I was going to die. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a deep voice say, "Breathe." It wasn't just in my head. I heard it out loud. Instantly, I came through gasping for air. That feeling of paralysis and fear kept happening throughout the night. I started seeing things at the foot of my bed, shadows I couldn't quite describe. I couldn't shake the horrible feeling that surrounded me, and I was left scared to sleep. After looking into it, I figured it must have been sleep paralysis, and I tried to brush it off. But then, 2 weeks ago, it happened again. Only this time it was much worse. I hadn't been drinking, and I was sure I felt myself get rolled onto my back in a way that felt completely unnatural. That's when the pressure started. A heavy weight pressed down on my chest, and I heard a voice inside my head telling me I was evil. It was like I was fighting something within myself. Things I can't explain were moving in and out of me. Sounds crazy, I know, but it felt like a battle inside my body. A voice was saying I had the spirit of Jezebel inside me, something I didn't even know much about until I looked her up later. I was terrified, arguing back, telling it to leave me alone. Eventually, the feeling lifted, and the room returned to normal. But I didn't see anything, and the voice itself wasn't clear. It was more of a feeling, pushing me down with fear and dread. The worst incident happened just 2 nights ago. I was having a dream about my mom. At least that's how it started. A kind, familiar voice was telling me I needed to calm my lifestyle down and stop keeping secrets from her. But then, suddenly, everything went dark. I felt like I was having a panic attack in my sleep. I woke up to the sensation of being held down against the bed, harder than ever before. I was being pushed up against the headboard, unable to move, unable to scream for my mom, even though I was desperately trying to. Then, something even worse happened. It felt like whatever it was began trying to push my legs open. I was terrified, trying to move my arms, but it took every ounce of strength just to shift slightly. I was arguing with something inside my head, but this time, along with the fear, I was angry. I don't remember exactly what it was saying, but I remember swearing at it, telling it to get away and leave me alone. It felt like the hardest fight I've ever had, just trying to push this thing off of me. Finally, the pressure lifted, and the room was normal again, but I was still terrified. I ran downstairs, too scared to stay in the room. I even started crying, which I rarely do. I just didn't know what was going on. I've sleepwalked before, but I've never experienced anything like this. My mom is religious, though not over the top, and while I'm not as devout, I believe in God and know a lot about the Bible. Is my mind just messing with me? I've never felt like it was. I've always appreciated having a Christian mother and never had experiences like this before. Recently, I've been a bit off the rails, partying too much and keeping things from my mom. Could it be guilt eating away at me? What's really scaring me is that when these things happen, it doesn't just feel like sleep paralysis, it feels evil. There's also a history of paranormal activity in my family. My uncle used to mess with Ouija boards, which caused a lot of disturbances in their home growing up, and my great-aunties used to read tea leaves. I know this all sounds wild, but I'm just a regular girl with good people in my life. I even study psychology, so I should be able to chalk this up to my mind playing tricks on me. But I can't. I'm terrified this is going to keep happening, and I have this awful feeling it's only going to get worse. My experience happened last winter in February 2008, and it's still vivid in my mind. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before, and there was no reason for me to imagine what I'm about to share. It's as clear now as it was back then. The day had started as usual. I woke up, went to school, came home, and just relaxed. I went to bed that evening feeling neutral, with no particular mood, and I fell asleep without any issues around 10 p.m. A couple of hours later, I woke up, feeling uncomfortable, but this wasn't unusual for me. After about half an hour of tossing and turning, I managed to fall back asleep, but it didn't last long. I kept waking up and falling asleep again in a frustrating cycle that lasted into the early morning hours. At one point, I had a bad dream, though like most people, I can't remember exactly what it was. I woke up with a start, lying there for a few seconds, trying to gather my thoughts. When I opened my eyes, that's when I saw it. My entire field of vision was filled with a man's face. He was staring right at me. I was absolutely terrified, frozen in place. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. All I could do was look into his eyes, unable to escape his gaze. I remember every detail of his face. It was scruffy, unshaven, with dirty, messy hair, and a rough, weathered appearance. He looked like he hadn't cleaned up in a long time. I don't know how long I was staring at him. Time seemed to stretch on forever, but after a few blinks, the face vanished, just as suddenly as it had appeared. The moment it was gone, I felt like I could move again. I immediately switched on the light and scanned the room, heart racing. My brother was still fast asleep in his bed, completely unaware of what had just happened. I was drenched in sweat and too shaken to fall back asleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told my parents about what had happened, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. They brushed it off like it was nothing out of the ordinary. I asked if they had ever experienced anything like that, but of course they hadn't. Months passed, and in September 2008, I left home for university and moved into the halls of residence on campus. But ever since that night, sleep has become a real struggle for me. It now takes me 2 to 3 hours to fall asleep, and even when I do, I wake up after only a couple of hours drenched in sweat. The worst part is this happens whether I'm at home or at university. The same restless feeling follows me wherever I go. At night, I often hear strange noises inside my room, which makes me scan the room over and over again. I feel an overwhelming sense of paranoia, like I'm constantly on edge. The only time I feel comfortable sleeping is when the sun is up, but that's led me to miss more than a few lectures. Recently, I went home to visit my family, and I brought up the experience again with my dad. To my surprise, he seemed more interested than he had been right after it happened. That's when he revealed something chilling. My dad had a very similar experience. One night, he woke up for no apparent reason and saw a man standing at the end of his bed, walking around the room. The image was so vivid that my dad could even describe the man in detail. He was wearing a red checkered shirt and carrying something. The man was tall, and my dad called out to him, but there was no response. When my dad switched on the light, the man disappeared. After hearing my dad's story, I started wondering if these sightings had something to do with the house itself. Our house was built in 1936, just before World War II, and there's a World War II bunker underneath our garage. I know that a woman lived in the house before us, but she passed away before we moved in. I don't know if she had a husband or if that could explain what we've seen. Whatever the cause, these experiences have really affected me. I don't know how to shake this constant feeling of fear before going to sleep, and I don't know what or who could be behind these sightings. The same thing had happened when he initially blessed the loft. It had been thrown at him. My dad isn't one to joke about things like that, so I knew he was serious. After that, everything stopped. I never really felt safe in that house again, but the activity quieted down. I lived there for a couple more years before moving in with my grandparents. Their house had its own strange noises and a presence, but it was friendly, nothing like the oppressive energy in the London house. I've since looked into the events that happened there, and it seems to fit the characteristics of something more malevolent, possibly even a demon. I'd love to hear any opinions on this. This story is a follow-up to sinister presence during my childhood. I ended that story by mentioning how the phenomena in my 300-year-old childhood home seemed to be bound to one particular room and part of the landing. The malevolent presence of the ghost in that room had calmed down after I moved out, but now my mother is experiencing increasing problems with it, and I'm genuinely concerned for her. I feel like I need to do something, but I'm not sure what. Since I published the last story, my parents have made several changes to the house. The room with the male ghost has remained untouched, but they've redecorated other areas and converted the outbuildings and barns into lodgings for short-term lets. With all the renovations, my mother has been using the haunted room to charge her mobile phone, as it's the only room that still had electricity during the construction. Fortunately, she hasn't had to spend much time in there, just long enough to plug in and retrieve her phone. Last Saturday, she finally told me what she's been experiencing, and her message left me shocked. She handed me her phone, showing one voicemail. Strangely, there were no missed calls. The voicemail had simply appeared. When I dialed in to listen, the first thing I heard was white noise. Nothing too alarming, but unsettling nonetheless. Then, about 10 seconds in, a gruff, angry male voice came through, buried in the static. At first, it was incomprehensible, but soon the words became disturbingly clear. What I heard next horrified me. The The voice was laced with expletives, vile sexual references, and abusive language, all directed at my mother by name. The most disgusting and perverted things I've ever heard were being hurled at her through the phone. My mother revealed that she had been receiving these kinds of messages throughout the winter whenever she charged her phone in that room, but she had been too afraid to tell me until now. Even before the voicemail started, both my mother and I had sensed that the male ghost in my old bedroom had a twisted, abusive quality. We always thought of him as a dirty old man who was somehow trapped, but we never believed he had such aggressive, malicious intentions. He was always more of a perverted presence than an outright dangerous entity. To clarify, neither my mother nor I have ever experienced succubus-like activity from this ghost, and I don't believe that's what we're dealing with. However, both of us have always felt watched and objectified when in that room. There's a sense of being mocked and viewed as sexual objects, especially when I was a child. My mother recalls feeling this even when she breastfed me in that room. It felt invasive, like we were being violated by an unseen presence. We've both been grabbed in that room before, but never in a sexual way, more like a rough, boisterous jolt. The atmosphere, however, always had a perverted undertone. I understand that some might question whether the voicemails are a sick prank rather than something paranormal, but I'd like to focus on the assumption that they are from this malevolent entity, given everything we've experienced over the years. My mother is convinced that this is not human, and honestly, so am I. I don't think reassuring her that it's just a prank will help at this stage. She needs real spiritual action. I also want to address something up front. I know some people might suggest uploading one of the voicemails as proof. While I understand that would validate the experience, the messages are too private and graphic to share publicly. They mention my mother by name and describe her in an inappropriate, deeply personal way. I will, however, try to set up my own phone in that room during my next visit and see if I receive a voicemail as well. If I do, I'll record it and share it in a less invasive way. Now, I'm unsure what the next steps should be. Should I contact a reputable medium or psychic to help with this? Would it be effective to sage the house again? Should my mother confront the entity every time she gets a new voicemail? I'm also worried about how dangerous this entity could be now that its activity seems to be escalating. Could it still be a frustrated, trapped old man? Or is this something far more sinister? I'd appreciate any advice on how to deal with this. I'm especially concerned about the safety of my mother, as she's the one facing this directly. As many of you may know, on May 22nd, I went to see Derek Ackera's live show in Kettering. It was an incredible experience, and the events that followed seemed to be linked to what happened that night. Although none of my relatives came through during the show, I left feeling at peace. At the end of the performance, Derek said something that really stuck with me. All of the spirits here tonight, whether they manage to contact you or not, are following you home. I can guarantee that you will all experience something paranormal before the bank holiday is over. So, naturally, I kept an eye out for any signs. By the time bank holiday Monday arrived, I hadn't experienced anything out of the ordinary. No signs from any of my deceased relatives. I went to bed that night feeling a little disappointed but still comforted by the thought that my loved ones were watching over me. Then, close to midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of the fire alarm ringing. I sat up and heard my parents say, "What the?" And then, just as quickly, the alarm stopped. My dad got up to check the house, but everything was fine. We have 2 fire alarms, one upstairs and one downstairs, both the same make. It was the upstairs one that had gone off. I started wondering why it had triggered. If there had been a fire, the downstairs one should have gone off too. If the battery was low, the alarm would have continued beeping. Plus, no one had pressed the button. It's really hard to push, and we were all in bed. There was no smoke around either. That's when Derek Ackera's words came to mind. Maybe it was my nan, granddad, great-gran, or great-granddad just letting me know they were still around. My parents agreed with me on this. At the moment, I've been under a lot of pressure. Studying for my GCSEs, at the time of writing, I have only 2 left out of 16, and I've definitely been feeling the stress. On top of that, my 16th birthday was coming up on June 5th, a milestone my nan had really wanted to be around for. On June 3rd, just 2 days before my birthday, I was sitting in my room around 9:20 p.m., watching The Apprentice. All of a sudden, my TV switched itself off, going straight into standby mode. Normally, I have to press a button either on the TV or on the remote to turn it off, but I was sitting several meters away from the TV, and my remote was resting on the shelf above me. When I turned it back on, the TV came back to life without any issues. It was strange, but I didn't think too much of it. The following night, on June 4th, just after 10:15 p.m., I was getting into bed, feeling a bit down because of the ICT exam I had the next day. Not the most fun way to spend the day before your birthday. I have a blue star-shaped bedside light that's mounted on my wall, and it's always been a pain to turn on or off because you have to flick the switch really hard. As I went to switch it off, the light dimmed, fizzled, and then went out completely, only to come back on moments later, shining as bright as ever. Just to make sure there wasn't a problem, I switched it off and on again, and it worked perfectly. It wasn't until the next morning, my birthday, that it dawned on me. Maybe it was my Nan's way of visiting me. Even though I wasn't 100% certain, the thought made me feel so happy. My exam went as well as it could have, and the rest of my birthday was amazing. I truly believe my Nan and Granddad were with me, making the day extra special. So, I guess Derek Ackara was right after all. Smiley face. This just happened to me a few minutes ago, and I'm still shaking. I wish I had my camera with me from the start because it seriously scared the life out of me. It was around 1 p.m., and I was sitting at the dining room table, just casually surfing the web on my laptop while eating some ice cream. The dining room is connected to the living room and kitchen, and directly above is my parents' bedroom. My bedroom is above the living room, and the office is above the kitchen. As I was sitting there, I suddenly started hearing a series of bangs coming from above me. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was just noise from outside since the window was open. But the banging kept going, and it was getting harder to ignore. I was definitely starting to feel uneasy. Then, at around 1:29, there was a huge bang, like something heavy had dropped onto the floor above me, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Heavy running footsteps. They ran through my parents' bedroom and into my bedroom. It was so loud and clear that my heart leapt into my throat. I panicked and ran outside, looking through my parents' bedroom window, but nothing was moving inside. In my panic, I managed to pull the sliding door off its hinges, and when I tried to shut it, it got stuck. So now I was basically trapped with no easy way out. Freaked out, I called my dad and told him what had just happened. He tried to calm me down, reminding me of what Derek Ackara had said, "Nothing evil can enter your house," and suggesting that it was probably just my Nan or another relative making their presence known. Despite his reassurances, there was no way I was going upstairs to check on my own. Then I remembered I had a video camera. Trying to muster some courage, I blasted my music and sang along shakily as I made my way upstairs. I checked my room, my parents' room, and the office. Everything was untouched. No sign of anything that could have caused the noise. Relieved, I grabbed my camera and headed back downstairs to get on with what I was doing. But just as I was starting to feel a little calmer, I heard a loud scraping noise, like someone was dragging heavy furniture around in my parents' bedroom. My fear spiked again. I swore out loud, grabbed my things, and made a dash for the back door, only to remember the door was stuck. I was completely trapped, and my mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get out. The windows were locked, and all the keys were upstairs. The front gate was locked, so I couldn't get out that way either. I felt helpless. I called my dad again, who said he'd finish work as quickly as he could, but reminded me that nothing could hurt me. He told me to try acknowledging the presence and talk to it if anything else happened. I was nervous, but I decided to give it a try. Determined to get a shot of the window, I went through every drawer and cupboard, searching for the key to open the big window by where I was sitting. I finally found it, opened the window, and clambered out with my camera in hand, swearing and shaking the whole time. I must have looked like a crazy person to the neighbors. I managed to take a small video of the office and my parents' bedroom windows, but then my phone rang, and I had to get back inside. As I sat there, the banging continued. Desperate, I shouted, "Just stop it, please." I was at my wits' end and so scared, even though part of me knew it might be nothing. But I couldn't bring myself to go upstairs again. I'm terrified of what I might find. I sleep in a bedroom that I share with my little sister on a bunk bed. However, she often gets sick easily and prefers to sleep with my mom until she feels better. One night, while trying to fall asleep alone, I suddenly heard a loud, single tap coming from the corner of the room where our dressing table stands, complete with a mirror and all of our things. I opened my eyes but saw nothing, so I went back to sleep. This sound, like a loud static snap, has happened many times around the house, particularly near the TV when it's turned off. It's almost like someone is leaning on our Freeview box. The noises are faint, but distinct, and always catch me off guard. Another time, in the very early morning, around 4 or 5 a.m., I suddenly woke up for no apparent reason. As I lay there, I heard my mom's bedroom door creak open, followed by the sound of footsteps running down the stairs and into the kitchen. I could hear doors opening and the clatter of someone getting out a saucepan, placing it on the hob. It wasn't loud enough to wake my mom or sister, who were both snoring away. Initially, I thought it was my mom, but she never runs up and down the stairs unless she's in a hurry, and she definitely wouldn't be using a saucepan in the middle of the night, especially not when we have a kettle for her hot water bottle. Plus, she wouldn't be making food at that hour either. And my little sister? She's too scared to go into dark places alone. So who or what was it? I still don't know. I've noticed that strange things often happen when I'm trying to sleep, like something is deliberately trying to get my attention. One night, when our room was cluttered during a clear-out, 2 porcelain fairies were sitting on the floor, side by side. Their hollow, chunky figures, each sitting on flowers. I had just closed my eyes for a couple of seconds when I heard a loud clang. I immediately opened my eyes but didn't see anything unusual. The next morning, I knocked the 2 fairies together, and it produced the exact same sound I heard the night before. Interestingly, the fairies hadn't moved and were still 3 inches apart, and neither had been knocked over. It left me wondering what caused the noise. On another occasion, I was having a serious conversation with my mom, and I found myself staring at our newly painted magnolia-colored wall. Out of nowhere, I saw a small orb of light drift from the middle of the wall up to the top. I've seen a few orbs like this around the house before, but this one was the clearest by far. It was so distinct that it really grabbed my attention, even as I tried to focus on our conversation. Just last night, something unsettling happened. I had finished reading before bed and was turning around to switch off the bedside lamp behind me. As I started to turn, I distinctly saw what looked like black liquid dripping from the wooden planks that hold the top mattress of the bunk bed. It was as if the liquid was seeping through the mattress onto the wood, and then dripping onto my duvet. But when I looked closer, it vanished. As you might imagine, it was pretty hard to turn off the light after seeing that. Since my experience, I've heard a lot of strange things have happened during the making of certain horror films: The Exorcist, The Crow, The Omen, and Poltergeist. Things like members of the cast and crew falling ill or dying, fires on set, injuries, and even disturbing reactions from audiences, like people fainting, getting sick, and even one reported miscarriage. There have even been deaths on set during filming, like one man being shot with a gun that was supposed to be firing blanks. The metal casing accidentally fired off, hitting him in the stomach, and another where debris from an explosion hit a stunt coordinator in the head, leading to his death in the hospital. Rumors say that between 4 and 9 people died during the making of The Exorcist. I know that's a big gap, but let's just say a number of people were definitely injured, and at least 4 of them died. There were also eerie parallels between the films and real-life tragedies. For example, the special effects director for The Omen was in a car accident where his girlfriend was decapitated, just like the character David Warner in the movie. Now, my story isn't nearly as bad as those, but what happened to me definitely freaked me out. Back in 2004, I started a 2-year college course in graphic design. Most of our projects involved creating poster designs, DVD covers, packaging, and special effects. For our final year, we had to complete a final major project, FMP. I decided to create my own horror movie trailer, complete with a billboard poster, DVD cover, and advertisement poster. The film I came up with, Abby. After doing some research, I decided that children make for the creepiest horror characters. My friend's daughter, Abby, was 5 at the time, and with my friend's permission, I decided to use her as the main character in my project. I went to their house, bought a plain white dress, and we covered it in dirt and fake blood. We backcombed Abby's hair, did her makeup to make her look pale and gaunt, and darkened her eyes. The transformation was incredible. She went from cute Abby to terrifying Abby. For a child so young, she took it seriously, and we got some really creepy photos. I was thrilled with the results and used them throughout my project. I chose the scariest picture for the poster and DVD cover and uploaded the images to the college computer. I searched through fonts, trying to find one that would fit the horror vibe, but nothing worked. Finally, I found a free font online that was perfect. In big red letters with a dark drop shadow, I typed the title Abby across the top of the poster. Underneath, in smaller white text, I added the tagline, "The legend never dies." It took me a few weeks to get the poster and DVD cover exactly how I wanted them. We also filmed the trailer around the college. Then, just a couple of days before the project deadline, something bizarre happened. I logged onto the computer, opened the poster file, and immediately felt something was off. The title, which had read Abby, now said Kill 9 in large capital letters. I was spooked. One of my friends was sitting next to me, and I nervously laughed and asked, "What the is that?" He thought I had changed the name as a joke, but I hadn't touched it. I briefly considered that someone might have logged into my account and changed it as a prank. I deleted the text and typed Abby again, but as soon as I hit enter, it typed Kill 9 again. I asked my friend to try typing it, and the same thing happened. Kill 9. Now, I know what you might be thinking. If it was a glitch, surely it would have typed something like KIL with 2 I's because of the 2 B's in Abby. But it didn't. And where the number 9 came from, I have no idea. We closed the file and reopened it, and suddenly the title read Abby again, like nothing had ever happened. The glitch, or whatever it was, had just disappeared. I still have no clue why it did that, but it was really strange. Nothing else out of the ordinary happened during the time I was working on my FMP, but the fact that it typed Kill 9 of all things has always left me wondering. Why that message? Why then? I moved into my new house last October with my daughter. It's a brand new house, freshly built, and I'm the first person to live in it. The first strange incident happened sometime in January when my boyfriend, Dan, was over. We were in bed, just about to fall asleep, facing each other. Suddenly, we both heard a voice, a deep male voice, right between us. It simply said, "Oi." It scared us both, and we couldn't figure out where it came from. It definitely felt like something supernatural, but after eventually falling asleep, we kind of forgot about it. A week or so later, Dan had given me a picture frame with a photo of the two of us. I placed it next to my bed, with a photo of my daughter on the other side. One night, when I went up to bed, I was alone this time. I noticed the picture of Dan and me was face down. I didn't think much of it initially, assuming it had just fallen over. But then it started happening all the time. I got fed up with finding the frame face down, so Dan and I decided to test it. We made sure the picture was standing upright and left the house for the day. When we got back, the photo was face down again. The strange thing is that this picture frame is sturdier than the one holding my daughter's photo, yet hers never moves. Another night, Dan and I were in bed again. I had just changed the sheets, so there was nothing on the bed. Suddenly, we both heard what sounded like something falling off the bed and rolling across the floor. When we looked, there was nothing there. We shrugged it off and got comfy again. But then we heard a loud smash from downstairs. We both froze. My first thought was, someone's breaking in. But then I remembered the washing machine was on, and maybe the vibrations knocked a glass off the counter. We went to check, but there was nothing on the floor. Dan checked the entire downstairs. No broken windows, no break-ins. Everything seemed fine, so we went back to bed with no further issues that night. Another unsettling moment happened while I was outside having a cigarette. Dan was watching TV, and my daughter was playing in the living room. The glass doors to the garden allow me to see inside, and my daughter came to the door as she often does, pressing her face against it like kids do. But this time, she just stood there, and something was off. Her eyes went red for 2 seconds. It scared the living daylights out of me. I couldn't even look at her properly after that. I tried to push away the bad thoughts, thinking maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but what I saw was real, and it terrified me. I hated that it happened to my daughter of all people. Since that incident with my daughter's eyes, Dan and I have heard banging noises around the house. I've even heard what sounded like screaming when I was alone. There have been plenty of other weird occurrences, too. But nothing major has happened in the last couple of months, though that might be because Dan hasn't been around much since he joined the RAF for training. I can't help but wonder if something is unhappy with us being together, or if it's something else entirely. I would really love to hear other people's thoughts on this. By the way, my daughter is 18 months old now. My grandfather passed away on January 7th, 2000, when I was 19 years old. But the story truly begins much earlier with the death of my uncle on January 6, 1979, before I was even born. My grandmother has always been a deeply superstitious woman, the type who insists on no new shoes on the table, saluting magpies, and never walking under ladders. But something shifted around Christmas of 1978. In an unusual move, she decided to take down the Christmas decorations on January 2nd, completely out of character for her. My mum believes she was trying to overcome her obsession with superstitions, perhaps attempting to break free from the constant worry. On January 6th, the police visited my grandparents' house with devastating news. My uncle had been in a car accident, and tragically, he didn't survive. As expected, my grandparents were heartbroken, but my grandmother took it particularly hard. Over the years, she blamed herself, convinced that taking down the decorations early had somehow caused his death. For her, it became an unshakable belief, a link between the tragedy and her actions. Life went on as it does, and the family grew. But my grandfather's health declined over the years, and by the end of 1999, he had been diagnosed with cancer. We knew that Christmas would be his last. As the new year approached, he became bedridden and refused to go to the hospital, knowing his time was near. He wanted to stay home, surrounded by his family. Everyone wanted to spend as much time with him as possible, though I couldn't visit due to having the flu. On the night of January 5th, my grandmother lay in bed beside my grandfather. For the past 3 days, he had been mostly incoherent, barely speaking. But that night, something remarkable happened. He suddenly sat up in bed, looking full of energy, like a man who woke up ready for a hard day's work. As my grandmother described it, she was stunned. She hadn't seen him so full of life in years. Then, he started speaking, having a conversation with someone she couldn't see. "I know. I'm looking forward to seeing you too. But don't expect me to leave your mother today. Let me get her through tomorrow, and then I'll come." He paused, as if listening to someone, then continued. "I know it wasn't her fault, but you can't tell that woman anything. She still thinks it's her fault after all these years because of that damn Christmas tree. I have to help her through tomorrow, and then I'll come. I promise." Hearing this conversation brought my grandmother immense comfort. It helped her process the grief of losing her son, and it prepared her for the coming loss of her husband. The next day, she called the family together to say their goodbyes. After my father took us home, my mother stayed with her siblings, waiting for the inevitable moment. That night, January 7th, was stormy. There's a tradition in Wales, and perhaps in other places too, of keeping the window open when someone is on their deathbed, so their spirit can slip away easily. But because of the storm, the window was shut. At 1 a.m., once my grandfather had kept his promise of staying through the anniversary of my uncle's death, he passed away peacefully. The next day, my grandmother went to the front door to receive a parcel that needed signing. My mother and her siblings were sitting in the living room, reminiscing and talking. To give you a sense of the layout, when you open the front door in my grandparents' house, you're looking directly up the stairs with the living room to your right. The stairs are old and squeaky. Every single step creaks when someone walks on them, and it's impossible to miss. As my grandmother opened the door for the postman and began telling him about my grandfather's passing, the stairs suddenly started to creak. Every person in the house fell silent as they listened to the distinct sound of footsteps coming down the stairs. My grandmother and the postman heard it too. Then, as they stood by the door, they felt a gentle breeze pass them by. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was our minds playing tricks on us. But in that moment, it felt like a sign. A reminder that my grandfather's spirit had left the house through the front door he had painted himself, as if he was on his way to reunite with my uncle. Whatever the explanation, it brought us comfort. Knowing that he had kept his promise to stay until after the anniversary, and that he had left on his own terms, helped us all find peace in our grief. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. We had been in the house for less than 2 weeks when things started to get strange. I was home alone, apart from my 6-month-old twins, who were in the living room while I was in the laundry room. Suddenly, both twins started crying hard, so I called out to them as I left the laundry room, shutting the door behind me. The moment I closed the door, I heard a loud bang from the other side. When I opened it, I saw a large dent in the door, and the iron, which had been on a shelf around the corner, was lying on the floor. There was no way the iron could have fallen, hit the door, and landed where it did without being thrown. Later that evening, my daughter appeared in the kitchen. She was very quiet and withdrawn, which was completely unlike her. After a bit of coaxing and some tears, she finally confessed that she hadn't been sleeping well. When I asked her why, she said that every night, a small boy appeared at the top of the stairs outside her room. He would either walk over and play with her little sister in the cot or sit cross-legged on her bed and stare at her. I tried to dismiss it, thinking it was just nerves about being in a new house. One night, while I was checking on both of my girls, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a black shadow darting past the doorway. It was so quick, but it made my heart race. Around the same time, my middle son claimed he had also seen a small boy on the stairs. That's when I began to feel genuinely afraid. My husband, however, didn't believe any of it and tried to brush everything off as imagination. Things escalated on Christmas morning. I woke the children up, but both of them seemed unusually quiet. My son burst into tears, saying that during the night, he had heard footsteps and, thinking it was Father Christmas, peeked out from under his blanket. But instead of Santa, he saw a pair of small feet in sandals. He hid under the quilt, terrified. Then, he felt the person climb onto his bed and start pulling the covers off him. He held onto the other end of the blanket as tightly as he could, but when he let go, the covers were thrown across the room from the side of the bed. Too frightened to move, he spent the entire night without his blanket. My husband still didn't believe any of it, and he tried to make light of the situation. That is, until he had his own experience. One day, I had to go out and left him in charge of the twins, who were eating in their high chairs in the kitchen. My husband was reading the paper when he heard me calling from upstairs, saying, "I'm upstairs. I need a hand with something." Without thinking, he shouted back, "What do you want?" and went to open the door to the stairs. But just as he did, he realized I wasn't even home. He heard footsteps crossing the landing towards the stairs. In a panic, he grabbed both twins, high chairs and all, and went outside to the garden. He stayed there until I came home. After that, the eerie calls continued. We'd often hear each other's voices calling from other rooms, only to find that the other person wasn't there at all. First off, I'm 15 years old. I'm known as a mature student at school, and I've never touched drugs or alcohol. I wouldn't say I'm a full believer in ghosts, but I've had enough strange experiences that I'm not against the idea either. I've never used a Ouija board or tarot cards, aside from angel cards, but a friend only asked me to try those a week ago, and nothing unusual has happened since, though they were oddly accurate. Recently, I went on holiday to Cornwall for a week with my friend and her family. The house we stayed in was lovely and cozy, but for some reason, it gave me chills. I often felt uneasy when I was alone in a room, especially in the downstairs bathroom behind the kitchen. I didn't mention anything about how the house made me feel to my friend or her parents, and they didn't seem to notice anything unusual either. The first 4 nights went by fine, but on the 5th night, I woke up in the early hours of the morning. I don't know what woke me, but something didn't feel right. I glanced around the room, and at the foot of the bed, by the bedpost, I saw a figure in white. It was indistinct, but I could tell she was wearing a white nightdress, and she had black hair. I couldn't make out her face, but I knew she was there. I wasn't paralyzed. I let out a cry before hiding under my quilt. The fear was overwhelming. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I didn't understand why I felt so terrified. The next morning, I told my friend about it. We were sleeping in the same room in single beds, and the figure had appeared right in the space between our beds. She laughed, thinking I was joking, and that was the end of the conversation. That night, we went on a ghost walk, where a local guide told us about the town's history and its ghost stories. I learned that at the bottom of the street where we were staying, there had been a plague pit where bodies of plague victims were dumped. Some of those people, thought to be dead, were actually in comas and ended up being buried alive. I also found out that the road behind the house used to be a coffin route to the cemetery. This freaked me out even more, and for the last 2 nights of the holiday, I barely slept, fearing I'd wake up and see that figure again. Thankfully, I didn't, but this wasn't the first time I'd seen something like this. My parents built our old house before I was born, so nothing bad had happened there. No deaths or accidents. But there had been evidence of early settlers nearby, and the foundations of an old house had been found. I vividly remember sitting at my desk as a child, learning my times tables, when I heard my name being called. It wasn't my parents or my brother, it was a female voice. I went to the kitchen and asked my dad if anyone had called for me, and he said no. Another time, in my old room, there were 2 single beds. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a woman in a white nightdress with brown hair, staring at me from the other bed. Again, I couldn't see her face, but I knew she was there, watching me. On another occasion, I woke up to see a man, or maybe a farmer, sitting on the bed opposite mine. He wore brown trousers with suspenders and a cream shirt, and he had a cap on. His face was blurred, but I knew he wasn't looking at me, just straight ahead. When we moved, we built a new house further down the same street, closer to my granny's. Unfortunately, the strange things I'd experienced in the old house followed me to the new one. I've seen the same woman by my bed, and just 2 months ago, I saw the farmer again. Only this time, he was kneeling beside my couch with his forehead resting on his arms, almost like he was praying. The land where both houses are built used to be farmland, belonging to my granddad. It feels like these figures are somehow tied to the land itself. While waiting for the new house to be built, we lived with my granny for a year, and I slept in the same room as her. During that time, nothing strange happened, which makes what I'm experiencing now even more confusing. On holidays, I've sometimes heard animals crying out. No one else hears them but me. I've seen figures in the dark, though not the farmer or the woman. Occasionally, I hear a high-pitched noise in my ears, and it feels like I'm underwater. My hearing gets distorted, and the noise drowns everything out. Sometimes, tears fall from my eyes for no reason, and even though I'm not sad, I begin to feel a deep sense of loss. Most of these things happen in the evening or early hours of the morning. I see shadows out of the corner of my eye, and when I turn, nothing's there. I sometimes catch glimpses of shapes through glass windows or doors, but never in mirrors. And when it's dark, white shapes seem to form in the distance. I just want to know if there's any way to stop these experiences. They leave me scared, and I can't sleep properly for days afterward. Writing this has been hard because I'm not someone who talks openly about this kind of thing. I've only told one friend about what happened in Cornwall, and no one knows about the rest. I'm afraid of being seen differently. I just want to live without feeling like I'm being watched in my own home, without getting chills in different places. It's gotten so bad that I can't stay in my room at night unless the door is open and someone else is upstairs with me. I'm terrified of being alone in the dark. My grandma passed away 7 years ago in her hospital bed, just 5 days after my nephew was born. She had spent the last 6 months of her life in that hospital, staring at the same 4 walls day in and day out. Toward the end, she developed a different personality, one that would take over for a day, only for her to return to her normal, cheery self the next. This new side of her made her paranoid. She was convinced that people were out to poison her. She also claimed that she had spent days on the ward with relatives who had long passed and even famous people. She was certain they had visited her. After she died, my mum and her 2 siblings began sorting through my grandma's house, preparing it to be sold. Not long after she had passed, my mum went to the house alone to start clearing out the living room, packing away photographs, books, and ornaments. She hadn't been there long when she started hearing loud bangs coming from the room above, the bedroom where my grandma had slept. The noises grew louder and louder, and my mum described it as if a child were throwing a tantrum, kicking and punching the floor in a rage. Then there was a huge slam. Startled, my mum went upstairs to check and found my grandma's bedroom door slammed shut. The banging continued, and when she tried to open the door, it felt as though someone was pushing against it, keeping her from getting inside. Terrified, my mum ran back down the stairs and left the house, completely shaken. The night after we were told about my grandma's passing, my sister was at home with her husband, their son, and their newborn baby. At the time, my nephew was only 4 years old and didn't fully understand what had happened with my grandma. I'm not sure if my sister had told him about her death or not. That night, his dad was putting him to bed and reading him a story when my nephew suddenly sat up, staring at the corner of the room by the wardrobe. "Daddy, who's that lady?" he asked, pointing directly at the wardrobe. My brother-in-law turned to look, but saw nothing. He told my nephew there was no one there and to lie down and go to sleep. But my nephew persisted, describing the lady he saw. She was wearing a dress and had curly red hair, just like my grandma. My brother-in-law, who usually doesn't scare easily, panicked and bolted downstairs, telling my sister to go check. But when she went up, my nephew was already asleep. The following morning, in the same house, my sister woke up with the baby and went to open the curtains. When she did, she was met with an eerie sight. At least 50 magpies were gathered around the house. They were everywhere, on the fence, in the garden, on the car, and even on the windowsills. They were all squawking loudly, and strangely, they were only surrounding her house. None of the neighboring houses had a single bird. I'm 13 now, and ever since I was born, strange, ghostly things have been happening to me. First of all, my entire house is haunted. A man died in my kitchen, and a lady hung herself in my bedroom. When I was a baby, it was my first night in my own room. Everything was going well until my mum was jolted awake from a deep sleep, feeling a sense of horror that something was wrong. She rushed into my room, only to find a piece of string wrapped around my neck. She quickly removed it and went back to bed, but that moment still haunts her. Thankfully, it was a protective incident, as if something was trying to help. When I was about 6, my auntie had a strange experience. She went upstairs to use the toilet but came running down into the living room not long after, clearly terrified. When we asked what had happened, she said she had seen a male figure walking across the landing. My mum has had many experiences too. One time, she was home alone, lying on the sofa watching TV, when she saw the figure of a young girl walk up to the door and peer through the window. Thinking it was me, she went upstairs to check, only to find me fast asleep in bed. I've always seen strange shapes and shadows around my house. My mum or dad would often come with me when I was too scared to go somewhere alone. But things started getting much more intense last year when I was 12. It was last April, just before my uncle's wedding. I had bought a new dress that day, and it was hanging behind my door. I went to bed feeling happy, imagining how I'd look in the dress. But in the middle of the night, I woke up in terror. I saw a male figure walking toward me. I screamed and shouted for my mum. She ran into my room, asking what was wrong, but all I could say was, "Get me out of here, quick!" She kept asking why, but I couldn't explain. I just repeated myself over and over. All this time, the man was standing right behind her, but I didn't tell her, not wanting to scare her too. I just wanted to get out of that room. Eventually, I fell asleep in my mum's bed. The next morning, I told her about the man behind her. She was shocked and could only say, "Oh my God!" Over the next few months, countless things happened, too many to share here, but some moments still haunt me. One night, I was taking a bath when I felt someone pinch me on my right shoulder. The bathroom door was slightly open, so I thought it was my mum trying to scare me. I called out for her, but she was downstairs. I called louder, and when she came up, I told her what happened. She looked at my shoulder and saw a red handprint where I had been pinched. Another strange thing happened with humming noises. At first, I thought it was my mum singing, since she loves to hum. But when I asked her, she said she hadn't been humming, though she had also been hearing strange humming sounds lately. One night, I woke up in my mum's room and saw a nun walking out of the room while humming. I pulled the duvet over my head, crossed my fingers, and prayed that it would go away. After that, we had a spiritualist come to our house to help clear out the spirits, as things were getting out of hand. In the past month, there have been even more eerie occurrences. One night, I was sitting in the living room alone with the lights off when I saw a little boy come through the wall. I've seen him before, and so has my mum. Just this week, on Friday night, my dad, brother, cousin, her boyfriend, and I had gone out to the pub for dinner. When we got home, my cousin decided to see if she could sense anything in the kitchen. She did, and she got quite scared. Her boyfriend, trying to lighten the mood, went in and said, "If you're here, give us a clue. We're not scared." Though we were. He sat down next to me, and suddenly all the electrics in the house went out. We ran to the neighbors to see if their power had gone out too, but everything was fine for them. I'm not entirely sure how to begin this, so I'll just get straight to the point. My mum died when I was 10, and as you can imagine, it shattered me. For years, I had terrible dreams about her, where she wasn't really dead, just hiding somewhere, away from me for reasons I couldn't understand. As time passed, things got easier. I learned how to live without her, though whenever my sister took me to the crematorium to bring flowers, there was always this strange, heavy atmosphere in the air. It wasn't until the 4th anniversary of her death that the nightmares returned. Just like before, I had another one of those terrible dreams. I woke up in the middle of the night, sweating, with tears streaming down my face. I hadn't heard my mum's voice in so long. It had been years, and I couldn't even remember what it sounded like. But as I gasped for breath that night, I swear I heard her. It was so real, so vivid. I'm not sure if I was still half asleep or truly awake, but the fact that it sounded exactly like her makes me believe I was awake. Her voice was so clear. What she said, though, left me confused. From what I could make out, she said, "Babies are a blessing, but not everyone is blessed." At the time, it didn't make sense. I wasn't pregnant, and as far as I knew, neither was anyone close to me. So, I just brushed it off, figuring it was a strange part of the dream. But just 2 or 3 days later, my sister called me in tears. She thought she was pregnant, but when she went to the doctor, they found cysts on her ovaries and told her she couldn't have children. When she told me, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I remembered my mum's words from the dream. I told my sister about what I'd heard, which only upset her more. Still, she decided she wanted to visit our mum's resting place at the crematorium. It was also her 29th birthday, so we planned to go to the cinema afterward. When we got there and walked down the hill to the tree where my mum's ashes were buried, that strange, heavy atmosphere was there again. Only this time it felt even more oppressive than usual. Something felt off. Strangely enough, there seemed to be an unusual number of women with pushchairs, all brimming with babies. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but it felt like more than that. That night, when I got home and went to bed, I had no trouble falling asleep, but I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. for no reason. I thought about going right back to sleep, but some urgent feeling, made me look around my room. What I saw next has scarred me for life. As I glanced toward the window, I saw a face. It was unmistakable. It was my mum. Panic shot through me. I leapt out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I looked again, her face was gone. Even now, for months later, I still don't know if what I saw was something paranormal or just a cruel trick of the mind. But the memory of that night, of seeing her face at the window, still gives me chills, and I haven't slept well since. We've had many strange occurrences in our house since we moved in 7 years ago. I'll share these events in chronological order. The first week in our new home was stressful. There was a constant feeling of being watched, as if the house had a threatening atmosphere. My mum felt it too, and I became ill, which only heightened the tension. After a few months, I started experiencing something more direct. Bullying from what seemed to be a malevolent spirit, a man who seemed to linger in the attic. We rarely used the attic, only for storage, but he made his presence known. He began invading my dreams and even moved furniture around the house. One night, I had two vivid dreams influenced by this spirit. In both dreams, he used cartoon animals, and both dreams ended the same way. A cartoon cat hit me in the forehead with a metal stick. I woke up with a severe headache each time and realized I had to try to communicate with him, even though I was only 12. During this period, my bed was moved away from the wall without explanation. As I communicated with the spirit, I learned more about him. He had been a station master in the 19th century and had been hanged for a crime. He was incredibly territorial, and he had a dog, whom I later saw as a ghost, and my mom even heard it growling at night. While the spirit continued to affect me, the encounters were never as intense as that first one. One particularly strange experience happened early one morning. I got up at 5 a.m., turned on the light, and as I was about to switch on the TV, I saw something in the reflection of the screen. It was a girl, identical to me, standing in the middle of the room, wearing the sweater and trousers I used to wear during the day. She moved independently, acknowledging me in some way. I was so scared I ran to my mom's room and told her everything. Later that night, a shadow moved toward my mom's room and stopped near the landing, as if it was checking to see why I had run away. It happened again another night, this time closer to the TV. I turned it on, trying to ignore the fear. I eventually learned that the girl I had seen was my identical twin sister who had died before birth. Since then, I've also discovered the presence of a boy, my brother. When I asked my mom about it, she confirmed I was a triplet. There was also a dark shadow that used to follow me. It never communicated, and I didn't find out much about it. It resembled the symbol for the male restroom, a kind of stick figure. It caused me a lot of bad luck for a while, but eventually disappeared without a trace. We've also seen spirit animals in the house. One of them was my mom's childhood dog, who visited and brought her comfort. Another is a plain brown cat that both my mom and I have seen running around the house. We even have a cat toy in the living room that occasionally jingles, as if something invisible is playing with it. Once, we heard the sound of a bell collar from my mom's bedroom, even though no cat was there. Many spirits seemed to pass through our house. One was a cavalier who appeared late one night, sitting on the floor, searching for something. When I asked him what was wrong, he told me that someone had stolen something of great value from him. He had refused to move on because of this missing item. I explained to him that the event happened a long time ago, and he would never find it. Eventually, he passed over into the light. There are also two spirit horses with riders that run diagonally across our living room. They appear every few days and don't acknowledge anyone in the house. The last event I'll share is the case of the ripped bin liner. One evening, I switched off the kitchen light and went upstairs to use the computer. The bin liner, with a bit of rubbish in it, was sitting on the floor. While I was on the computer, I heard a noise from the kitchen, but it only lasted a few seconds, so I didn't check it. A couple of hours later, I went downstairs and found the bin liner shredded to pieces, with rubbish scattered everywhere. We're not sure what caused it. It could have been an ancestor, like my grandfather's spirit, who often switches the kettle on. Or it might have been something more sinister, like a poltergeist. Nothing like that has happened since. So, I've already told you all about my childhood home, but when I turned 16, we made a big move to London. It was the complete opposite end of the country, and the change was a huge adjustment for all of us. From the moment we moved into the new house, I disliked it. There was something about it that just felt off. At first, I chalked up my uneasiness to the fact that I had lived in the same house for 16 years. Of course, I was going to feel strange in a new place, but the uneasy feeling seemed to linger, especially in certain moments when I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't like the warm, harmless energy in my old home. This felt more unpleasant, though it would pass as quickly as it came. The house was in a fairly secluded area. To get to the next road, you either had to take a long walk or use a shortcut, a narrow alleyway that led through a small wooded area and out to the main road. My sister and I always rushed through that alleyway and the woods. There was this undeniable feeling of being watched, and it gave us the creeps. After a couple of months living there, I started noticing a strange pattern. Every time I walked alone through the wooded area at night, a black cat would appear and follow me. The first time, the cat rushed ahead of me, waited for me to catch up, and then ran ahead again. I figured it had just wandered off. But when I reached my street and walked up the garden path, the cat was sitting on our doorstep, as if waiting for me. At the time, we had a dog, so I had to shoo the cat away before I opened the door. A few minutes later, my mum looked out the window and said, "Your little friend's still there." Sure enough, the cat was sitting across the road, watching our house. I thought it was kind of sweet. This little black cat started making regular appearances, following me between the woods and the house almost every time I came home. I grew fond of him, and my parents joked that he might be my familiar, as he seemed to appear whenever I was around. If I saw him on the street, I'd bring him little treats, and he became almost like a second pet. Sometimes he'd come into the back garden and even sit in the downstairs lounge with me. We could shut that room off from the rest of the house so our dog wouldn't get to the cat. But soon, the cat's behavior started to change. He would come into the house, and instead of leaving after a while like he used to, he would sit by the door, staring at it almost like he wanted to go deeper into the house. One time, I tried to pick him up to direct him outside, but he suddenly lashed out and scratched my arms. He then lay down in front of the door, still staring. I offered him some food to try to coax him out, but instead he growled and attacked me again. This time, my screams startled him, and he ran out of the house. I was a little put off after that, so I didn't let him in for a few days. But when I did, he seemed back to his usual self until, again, he fixated on the door. Unfortunately, this time, I hadn't shut the door properly, and a draft blew it open. The cat bolted up the stairs. It was like he had been waiting for the opportunity, and he seemed to know exactly where he was going. Luckily, he couldn't get any further than the top landing, but there he sat again, staring at the next door. When I tried to move him, he growled low and wouldn't budge. Thankfully, our dog came bounding up the stairs and startled him enough that he ran out. I thought he would leave the garden as usual, but instead he stayed pacing back and forth, occasionally scratching at the glass if I came near the door. After about an hour, he finally left, but that night he came back. I heard a loud thud at the window, and when I opened the curtains, the cat was there again. For a moment, it didn't even look like him. His eyes seemed larger and his size appeared bigger. Maybe it was just my shock, but I didn't like what I saw. He was starting to freak me out, so I left the room. From that point on, whenever I saw him, he would jump out at me or follow me for a while before vanishing again. I talked to a neighbor about him, and she mentioned that no one knew who the cat belonged to. He had been around for as long as she could remember, getting fed by various people in the area. I don't know. Maybe this was just the nature of a particularly strange cat, but his odd behavior seemed to coincide with other, more sinister things happening in the house, and I couldn't help but feel there was something more to it than just a quirky feline. My sister just got married this weekend, July 18th, 09. She had her wedding reception in the Lake District, though she got married in Manchester, where we're all from. She rented out a lovely hotel in the lakes for the reception, so we could all spend the day celebrating with her and my new brother-in-law, Simon. She planned everything down to the last detail: the adult bouncy castle, an ice cream van that stayed all day giving us free ice creams, a wedding cake made entirely of Krispy Kreme donuts, because let's be honest, who really likes wedding cake? And even a full hog roast in the evening on the lawn outside. It was a beautiful day. Since she rented out the entire hotel, we all spent the night there too. The bedrooms were on 2 floors, the first and second. Families with children were put on the quieter second floor, away from the music. I was assigned a room on the first floor. Originally, I was supposed to share the room with a friend, but she couldn't make it due to illness. So, I ended up having the room to myself, which I actually preferred. The room itself had 4 bunk beds, as the hotel was designed for school trips and group activities. A few weeks before the wedding, my sister had mentioned the sleeping arrangements, and we all laughed when she told us that the first floor, where I'd be staying, was rumored to be haunted. The hotel's owner had told her that staff members had seen strange things in the corridor and the rooms. I was pretty excited, as I'm into that kind of stuff, even though it scares me a bit. On the day of the wedding, we arrived at the hotel and were shown where our rooms were. I found mine, dropped off my bags, and left quickly. The room had a freezing, eerie feel to it that I couldn't explain. I didn't stay long, just long enough to drop my things off. Then I went back downstairs to join the others. Later in the evening, around 6 o'clock, after the meal and speeches, I was talking to my brother-in-law about the corridor on my floor. He told me that if I went to the end of the corridor, there was a door leading to the toilets. My room was just 2 doors away from that. He also said that if I looked left before going into the toilets, I'd see a dark corridor with no windows or lights. That was where the staff had reported seeing things. After a few drinks and feeling a bit braver, I borrowed my mom's digital camera and went upstairs. I walked past my room, down to the end of the corridor, and turned left. I didn't dare go down the dark corridor. It looked too creepy. But I took a few pictures with the flash on, hoping to catch something. I didn't expect the pictures to turn out great, but I figured I could use Photoshop later to lighten them and see if anything unusual appeared. When I finally got around to lightening the pictures, 2 of them looked perfectly normal. But the third one, which had a reddish-purpley tint, looked freaky. I'm not sure if you can see what I see, but it looks like a demon-like face, almost like the Scream mask from the films. The face appears on the left-hand side of the door, as though it's peeking around the corner. When I was about 12, I lived in South London in the late 70s. We were a poor but happy family, and at that time I didn't know much about ghosts. It wasn't really something I thought about. One week, my friend Gary stayed over at my house. We were in the same school and shared my bedroom. Like a lot of kids back then, we used to sneak cigarettes in my room. One evening, I was lying on one end of my bed, and Gary was under the covers at the other end. We had a packet of cigarettes in the middle with an ashtray. I was allowed to smoke in my room after being caught smoking outside many times. It was just what kids did in those days. At one point, I reached for the cigarette packet, but it was gone. I thought Gary had hidden it, but he thought I had. After searching the room, we found the packet under a table at the other end of the room. We laughed it off, thinking it was a prank. But when it happened again, this time with the cigarettes moving after just 10 seconds, we found them under the table once more. After repeating this 3 or 4 times, we realized it wasn't either of us doing it. I suggested we write a note on a piece of paper asking, "Is there anyone there?" with a box underneath for an answer. We slid the paper and a pen under the bed, and after about 10 seconds, we checked again. To our shock, the word yes was scrawled in messy handwriting. We started asking more questions, things like, "How old are you? What's your name? When did you die?" Some of the answers were clear, while others were vague, like the ghost didn't want to give us exact details. What we did gather was that it was a young man, about 18 years old, of German origin, who had died around 1918. He didn't like the dark attic but enjoyed being around people. We also asked how many ghosts were in the house and were told there were 4, but all of them were good spirits. Over the next couple of evenings, we kept communicating, getting answers to our questions. But then, one night, everything changed. When we retrieved the paper from under the bed, the responses were now filled with swear words, in a different handwriting. At first, we thought our friendly spirit was messing with us, but we soon realized it wasn't. The new presence seemed darker. Objects in the room began to move, and not just after we left them. Sometimes we'd see things move right before our eyes. This all started when the hostile messages appeared, filled with scribbled writing and curses. We asked our original spirit what was happening, and he explained that bad spirits had entered the house and were causing the disturbance. We asked if we could do anything to help, and he told us to call for help in our minds. After some time, the spirit told us that help had arrived and the bad spirits were gone. Things started to calm down, but the experiences weren't over yet. We tried a few experiments, like placing small objects inside bottles and covering them with paper, asking the spirit to move the objects into different rooms. To our amazement, it happened. The objects would move without the paper or bottles being touched. But things took an unsettling turn when an object started moving under the bed covers. Felt like a hand. We asked questions, and the hand would shake once for no and twice for yes. Eventually, we learned that this presence was a girl. I was too scared to lift the covers and look at the hand, but Gary did. He said it was white. This girl spirit started doing strange things, like taking our cigarettes and putting them inside our underpants without us knowing. Then it got worse. She started scratching us with long, fine scratches about 6 to 8 inches long. Gary got fed up and kicked the hand under the covers, and after that, it disappeared. We thought that would be the end of it, but the next night, the room went crazy. Objects started flying everywhere. I had some heavy fossils, and I was worried they'd hit us, so we began throwing loose objects into drawers. But the activity only got worse. Even when we left the house for school, objects would be thrown at us in the street, despite my bedroom windows being closed. I had a school Bible, and Gary read from it before dropping it on the floor. Surprisingly, the activity died down after that. Gary left to go back home the next day, and things seemed to calm down. But soon after, the activity started again, and this time I was alone. I was so scared that I prayed for help, asking for whatever was haunting me to leave. It worked. The activity stopped completely. Looking back, I believe the strange happenings were somehow connected to Gary. Lesser things continued to happen at his house after he left. This all might sound incredible, but I have no reason to make any of this up. The world is full of strange things, and this is just my story. Apart from these events, I've only seen a ghost once, clear as day. It scared me so much I froze and could barely breathe. All I could think was, "Don't look at me." There was something terrifying about its eyes, though it wasn't at my house. It happened around the corner in a derelict building. I believe I've been physically touched by a ghost, even though I've never actually seen one. Each experience seems to happen when something significant changes in my life. The first occasion was just over 2 years ago, and rather than being frightening, it was comforting. My mom passed away suddenly on April 2nd, 2007. It was an incredibly distressing time for me, as I had never lost anyone so close before. About 6 weeks after her passing, after weeks of restless nights and little sleep, I was lying in bed around 3 a.m., crying. I was on my side, facing the door, when I suddenly felt someone lying behind me. They gently put their arms around my shoulders and squeezed, like a hug. Whether it was my imagination or not, I swear I heard my mom's voice say, "Oh, Lynn." After that, I fell into the best sleep I'd had since she died. That experience gave me a sense of peace. Unfortunately, there have been 2 other occasions when I felt touched by something, and I can say with certainty that it wasn't my mom. Here's what happened. About 8 months ago, my dad, who had been struggling after losing my mom, moved into a residential care home. It was a traumatic time for both of us. Around the same time, I had another strange experience. Once again, I was lying in bed in the early hours of the morning, unable to sleep. This time, I was facing inward, with my back to the door. Suddenly, I felt a pressure on the top of my head, as if something was pushing it down. I shook my head, thinking it was just my imagination, but then it felt like something was tugging at my hip, pulling it forward. Only the side of my hip that was facing upward, as if I was being gently rocked. It happened 3 or 4 times before it stopped. There was definitely nothing physical around me that could have caused it. The most recent event happened just last night, 16/17 August 2009. I lost my job 6 weeks ago due to redundancy, and last night, I couldn't sleep at all. I know for certain that I was fully awake. The light outside was just starting to change, so I guess it was around 5 a.m., though I was too afraid to check the time on my phone. I was lying on my side, facing the door again, when I began to hear what sounded like children laughing outside. It was strange to hear at that hour, and it wasn't the sound of cats, which can sometimes mimic children crying. I also heard mumbled voices behind me, definitely coming from within my room. I could only make out one word, Raymond. As soon as I heard the name, I felt someone getting onto the bed behind me. They lay down right up close to me, so much so that I could feel heat on my back. An arm wrapped around me, and a hand rested on my thigh, more inner than outer. I know how that sounds, but that's exactly how it felt. I was terrified. I lay frozen for about a minute, thinking I must have fallen asleep without realizing it. But I knew I hadn't. I opened one eye and could see that I was fully awake. I couldn't bring myself to move or turn around to see if anything was actually there. At one point, I felt what I thought was a moth or a daddy longlegs on my cheek, but I was too scared to even brush it away, and I hate moths and daddy longlegs. The feeling of touch lasted for what felt like 5 minutes, though it might have been less. I tried to see if there were any reflections in the glass panels of my bedroom door, but it was still too dark to make anything out. What was even stranger was that my 2 cats, who usually sleep with me, weren't in the room. One of them always sleeps at the top of the bed, between the pillows, but that night, neither of them were there, which is very unusual. I only started to feel comfortable again when one of the cats came into the room about 20 minutes later. Needless to say, I didn't get back to sleep until 8 a.m. this morning, and now I'm typing this while absolutely exhausted. I'm desperate to know who or what this is and what they want. Today, I even contacted the Register of Cessions, I'm in Scotland, to find out the names of all previous owners of my property, dating back to when it was built in 1913, hoping that I might find a connection to the name Raymond. The man at the register was very kind and gave me all the details, but unfortunately, there was no mention of a Raymond in the records. I've lived in the same house my whole life, and I'm turning 16 in a few weeks. I'm not an expert on ghosts, demons, or the paranormal, but after reading other people's stories, I felt I should share my own. My house is pretty old, around 80 years, according to my mum. My grandma believes in ghosts and spirits, but the rest of my family is pretty skeptical, so we rarely talk about it. The first strange thing I remember happened when I was about 6. I had chicken pox and couldn't sleep because of the itching, so my mum let me stay up late. It was around midnight, and I was watching Jurassic Park alone in the living room. My mum was in the next room, so I wasn't too scared. We have this big old-fashioned fireplace that we rarely use, and it wasn't lit that night. At one point, there was a funny part in the movie, and I giggled. Then I heard a quiet but gruff laugh like a man's, coming from the fireplace. I turned around and saw a man's head in the fireplace, but it disappeared quickly. I wasn't scared at the time and just continued watching the movie. For the next few years, nothing significant happened, just the occasional shadows that I chalked up to non-paranormal things. Then, when I was about 10, my friends and I, being stupid, decided to play Bloody Mary. We made the bathroom really dark, filled the sink with water, and said Bloody Mary 3 times. The mirror fogged up, and I suddenly felt like I couldn't move, and the room got freezing cold. My friends had already run out of the bathroom. A few seconds later, one of them turned on the light and asked why I hadn't run when it got cold. I told them I couldn't move. We never talked about it again. For a while, things were uneventful, but then the strange activity started again when I turned 13. We had just redecorated the hallway, which runs most of the length of our house. We live in a bungalow, with all the rooms coming off it except for the kitchen and mine. We replaced the thick carpet with wooden floors, and that's when things got freaky. Every night around the same time, we'd all be in the lounge or dining room, and we'd hear something that sounded like it was being pushed through the letterbox, but nothing would be there. Then, we'd hear footsteps walking down the hall, followed by a bang. Sometimes we'd find the trap door to the attic swinging open, which was strange because it has a heavy lock and can't just swing open on its own. The scariest moments were when it sounded like the front door opened, followed by footsteps. Our front door is old, heavy, and stiff. You definitely hear it when it opens. My dad, on my grandma's side, believed it could be ghosts, but my mum and sister tried to come up with logical explanations for the noises. More recently, my sister and I were watching a movie in my room. The lights were on, and we were watching a comedy, so neither of us was feeling jumpy or scared. Suddenly, one of my shoes flew across the room and hit the radiator, missing me by inches. We both screamed and ran out of the room to tell our parents, but they didn't believe us. I'm absolutely convinced that it happened. There were 2 of us, and even my sister, who is the biggest skeptic ever, saw the shoe fly. She won't talk about it much now, but at the time, she agreed something had happened, though she still believes there's a logical explanation. My room used to be a sewing room, then a bathroom. It's small, but a lot of weird things happen in there. I sleep on a high bed, and I often feel like something is climbing up it. I also hear banging on the floor, which I try to ignore by playing audiobooks at night. Sometimes, though, the audiobook pauses or stops altogether and starts up again by itself. I try to explain it away, but I'm not so sure anymore. When I don't have the audiobook on, I sometimes hear whistling, like someone is waiting for something. I don't really know what to do about it. House history. Before we moved in, an old lady lived here. She was a librarian and knew my mum, who has lived on this street all her life. The lady moved out to live with relatives 25 years ago, so she's probably passed away by now, as she was already very old when she left. When we peel off old wallpaper while redecorating, we sometimes find writing on the walls, children's scribbles. Could have been her kids or grandkids, or maybe from a previous owner. We're not really sure. Throughout my life, I have frequently seen a dark shadow creep slowly up my wall and across my ceiling, always coming toward me. When I was younger, I would hide beneath my covers, hoping it would go away or that it was just my imagination. However, the reason I believe this shadow is a real manifestation of something evil is because of what happened when I was about 15. At that time, I had a pet budgerigar in a cage in my room. One night, I saw the shadow again. It came over the wall, across the ceiling, and as it reached me, it spread out. When it enveloped me, I blacked out and had a vivid, lucid dream of my budgie being set free. What's strange is that my room door was always shut at night, as were the windows. Our house was also alarmed, so there was no way I could have sleepwalked downstairs without triggering the alarm and waking everyone up. The next morning, my budgie was gone. We searched the entire house but never found it, not even its remains. To this day, my parents swear they had nothing to do with it, and it remains a mystery to all of us. 2 years later, while I was working with horses, the same thing happened. I saw the shadow creep over me and spread out across the room. I had the same feelings of fear and tightness in my chest as before. As it reached me, I passed out and had another lucid dream, this time of the horses being taken. The next morning, I woke to find that 2 horses had gone missing. Again, they were never found, and it was assumed they were stolen by horse thieves. Years passed, and I didn't encounter the shadow again until 7 years later, after I had my second child. One night, I was lying in bed with my eldest child next to me, and the baby was in a cot beside the bed. I suddenly felt the familiar sense of dread and saw the shadow approaching. This time, I knew it was coming for my daughter. Terrified, I leapt out of bed, screaming at the top of my lungs, "You're not having her! I won't let you take her!" I managed to jump across the room in one leap and flicked the light switch. The shadow disappeared instantly, and I haven't seen it since. Sometimes I think that the shadow left me alone because I finally stood up to it, refusing to let my fear control me. Other times, I wonder if it was just my imagination combined with strange coincidences. But the feeling, the deep sense of malevolence, the weight in the air around me, I can't believe I imagined that. It's hard to believe that if this were just some childhood overactive imagination, it would have followed me into adulthood and into different homes. I've hesitated to share this story, fearing that people will laugh or dismiss it because I've never heard of anyone else having a similar experience. But what I really want is to know if others have gone through something like this or if anyone can tell me what the shadow might have been. One more thing I wanted to mention, though it's unrelated to the shadow, is that my fiancé has epilepsy. We've been together for 3 years, and in the beginning, he used to have frequent seizures. They've calmed down now, but before each seizure, about 30 seconds before, I get that same tight-chested feeling I used to get when the shadow appeared. It's as if the air around me suddenly closes in. The sensation is nearly identical to the feeling I had whenever the shadow was near. 3 days after visiting the doctor and taking the morning after pill, I found myself staying at my boyfriend's house for the night. He lived in a beautiful old stone cottage in a small village with only 6 other houses and 1 large estate. His parents were asleep upstairs while we sat downstairs, relaxing in front of the log fire. Suddenly, I saw a young blonde boy, around 6 or 7 years old, talking to me. He was dressed in gray shorts and a woolen jumper. I don't remember anything he said, nor could I recall it immediately after the experience ended. However, my boyfriend relayed some of it to me later because I had been telling him what the boy was saying in real time, though apparently I was speaking too fast for him to catch everything. As the conversation went on, an old, tall, thin lady dressed in black appeared in the corner of the room. I could sense resentment or anger directed at me, and it terrified me. Throughout the experience, she would move around, disappear, and reappear, seemingly trying to scare me even more. Toward the end of it, she approached me and hit me several times. It wasn't just a spiritual sensation, it felt like actual physical pain. The next morning, I asked my boyfriend to check my back, as it was sore, and he found small bruises along my spine. According to my boyfriend, the young boy told me his name was Peter, and he had lived 150 years ago. He mentioned that he had been bullied at school, and during one incident, he was accidentally killed by an older child. Peter told me he had watched his parents live the rest of their lives in sadness, never recovering from his death. He said he wasn't angry or upset about the accident or the bullying, though it had hurt him emotionally at the time. While I don't remember any of what he said, I do recall that Peter radiated a sense of calm, and if it weren't for the old lady scaring me, I'm sure I would have felt fine about his visit. At one point, the young boy sat on my lap and put his arm around me. It was then that the old lady approached me. Terrified, I begged my boyfriend to make her go away. In desperation, we started reading Bible scriptures and reciting the Lord's Prayer, turning on all the lights in hopes of some protection. But nothing worked. In the end, I said to the boy, "It's okay, you can leave now." And at that moment, both spirits vanished. Afterward, I turned to my boyfriend and said, "I know the pills didn't work. I'm going to be pregnant." 3 weeks later, it was confirmed. I was pregnant. The morning after pill hadn't worked. My daughter was born with some developmental issues related to her kidneys, likely due to the pills, but after surgery, she's been healthy. Since then, a psychic, a shaman, and a spiritual course leader have all told me they sense that my daughter has immense spiritual and psychic powers. And over the years, I've seen what I believe to be proof of this. It all started around 2002. Little things would happen around the house that we didn't pay much attention to at first. Things like light bulbs burning out the moment they were replaced, even though the electrics were perfectly fine, and the odd feeling that someone was watching you. One day, my sister and I were cleaning, and a candlestick flew off the top of a bookcase and nearly hit her. The weird part was, it had been placed right at the back of the shelf, and the bookcase wasn't on a wobbly floorboard or anything. We couldn't explain it, but still, we tried to brush it off. The atmosphere in the house, though, was undeniably unsettling. Neither my mom, my sister, nor I liked being alone there. I'm not sure how my dad felt about it at the time. He's a devout Catholic and doesn't easily talk about such things. For a while, I wasn't getting along with my dad at all. I found myself becoming extremely disrespectful toward his religious beliefs, almost going out of my way to provoke him into arguments. I don't know why I acted like that. I wasn't raised to be disrespectful, especially not towards my parents. Both my mom and dad had always encouraged my sister and me to follow our own paths, even though we were brought up in a Catholic household. Things came to a head one afternoon. We had another argument, and I stormed off to my room. A little while later, my mom came up to check on me and asked me to stop provoking these constant, unprovoked fights with my dad. Not long after, my dad came into the room as well. For reasons I still can't explain, I just snapped. I started screaming at him, calling him horrible names, telling him I hated him. He stared at me in shock and told my sister to stay away from me. But I couldn't stop. The rage I felt was overwhelming, and I don't even know where it came from. My dad said he was going downstairs because he didn't want to be around me, and instead of calming down, I jumped up to follow him. I shoved him and started laughing. This weird, almost hysterical laughter that didn't feel like me at all. That's the last thing I remember clearly. Everything that happened after is what my sister later told me. According to her, my voice changed as I was yelling. It still sounded like me, but there was something off, almost like I had a sore throat. And every time I laughed, it was hysterical, like I was losing control. She said that when I went downstairs, I just sat on the sofa, still laughing, while my dad stood nearby. But here's where it gets really strange. My dad, who had been arguing with me minutes before, was no longer talking to me. He was talking at me, but as if I wasn't me. He asked me to recite the Lord's Prayer, and I kept getting as far as Our Father, before bursting into hysterical laughter again. Apparently, I just sat there, rocking back and forth, unable to finish the prayer. Then my dad said something that chilled my sister. He said, "You can't do it and you're scared." At that moment, I bolted. I ran down the next flight of stairs. Our house was a 3-story townhouse. My dad followed me and I kept trying to run away from him. Eventually, he backed me into a corner. At this point, he blessed me. And just like that, I calmed down. To this day, I have no idea what happened to me that afternoon. I'm certain that I said things I would never, under normal circumstances, even think about saying to my parents. That behavior wasn't me. It wasn't who I was, and it wasn't how I'd been raised. Since I can remember, I've had strange experiences that I've never been able to fully explain. I've shared these stories with friends and family, and while no one can offer a clear explanation, they've all agreed that something unusual has been happening. When I was still in school, there were times when I'd feel deeply uncomfortable in our house, though it wasn't constant. It seemed to happen sporadically at different times of the day. Out of nowhere, I would be gripped by this overwhelming fear, particularly of going into the bathroom, even when the house was full of people downstairs. It felt like someone was watching me, and I'd often sit at the top of the stairs, frozen, unable to move until the uneasy feeling passed. When I was very young, it got so bad that my mom would get frustrated with me because I couldn't bring myself to get ready for school until that sense of being watched had gone. At the time, I didn't see anything specifically, but I could always feel something there. Occasionally, I'd hear strange noises too. Even now, that uneasy feeling sometimes creeps up on me when I'm home, whether I'm alone or not. Sometimes, I can be by myself for days without any issues, but other times, that presence makes itself known, and I feel like I'm not alone in the house. When I play the piano in our extension, I often feel like someone is standing behind me, though I never see anyone. Once, I even heard sounds coming from the piano when no one was playing it, and when I went to check, there was nothing there. Another time, I entered the living room and was hit by a strong smell that instantly reminded me of my grandparents, though I have no reason to fear them. A few months ago, I was sitting at this computer in broad daylight, calm and alone in the house, when a shadowy figure of a man appeared beside me. He stood there silently for a few moments before disappearing. Completely freaked me out. For 5 years, I worked at a chemist, and the upstairs area always felt unsettling. Everyone who worked there felt it, like someone was standing right behind you, even when no one was there. One of the staff members once saw an old man upstairs, but he vanished almost as quickly as he appeared. One particular incident sticks with me. The shop was empty, and there were just 3 of us working. The pharmacist, our boss, me, and a woman named Leslie. It was late afternoon, and I was pricing items when something caught my eye. In the doorway between the shop and the dispensary stood an elderly man. He was sharply dressed in a suit and hat, so well put together that he seemed out of place. He looked like our boss, but with darker features. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming he was a customer, even though I hadn't heard the bell ring when he entered. I put down the price gun and walked over to help him, but in just a few seconds he vanished. He was nowhere to be found, and the bell on the door hadn't gone off, so we knew he hadn't left the shop. I asked Leslie if she had seen him, and she had, just as vividly as I had. We were puzzled and described the man to our boss, who later showed us a photograph of his father. The resemblance was uncanny. His dad had passed away years before. Leslie saw the same man again upstairs a few months later, but I never did. At university, things got even stranger. I was living in a flat with 6 other people, which had been built on an old army barracks. None of us knew about its history at first, but as things started to happen, we began to wonder. Items would disappear from locked rooms, only to reappear in strange places like the storage cupboard or corridor. Once, I had safety pins arranged on my notice board, and the next day they had all been moved to one corner of the board. One day, a friend and I were sitting in my room when we heard a loud crash from her room. We rushed over, only to find her photo frame on the opposite side of the room, as if it had been thrown. Her lamp was also knocked over. It got so intense at one point that several of us started sleeping in the same room out of fear. One night, I woke up to see a man standing beside my bed, dressed in uniform. He told me not to worry, that everything was fine, and I should go back to sleep. Strangely, I wasn't scared in the moment, but the next morning, I was shaken. Others in the flat had similar unexplainable experiences, and none of us ever figured out what was going on. The most terrifying experience I've had, though, happened in my bedroom at home. One night, I woke up to see an old woman floating above me, staring down at me. She looked like my grandmother, who had passed away years before, but her features were slightly different. She didn't say a word, just hovered there. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. I closed my eyes, hoping she would be gone, but every time I opened them, she was still there, each time getting closer to my face. I hid under my covers for what felt like hours, terrified. Eventually, she was gone, but that night remains one of the most frightening experiences of my life. 2 years ago, when my parents went on holiday, my sister and I had the house to ourselves. We were having a great time until one night, something happened that I still can't explain. I had just gone to bed when I felt as if someone was lifting me off my bed, pushing me up by the middle of my back. I was so terrified that I ran out of the room, straight to my sister, who said I looked pale, like all the color had drained from my face. She went to check my room and found the curtains wide open, even though I had closed them before I left. I hadn't even fallen asleep yet, so I know it wasn't a dream. The last experience I had in my room was different. One night, after I had gone to bed, I saw a young woman walk across the room to the foot of my bed. She was dressed in white, and for the first time, I didn't feel scared. I was completely calm. She waved at me as if to say goodbye, then walked through the wall and vanished. I have no idea who she was, but her presence didn't frighten me. Since then, I haven't seen anything else in my room. A couple of weeks later, my dad had an experience of his own. He's a complete skeptic when it comes to anything paranormal, but one day he was outside in the car and saw a young woman walking across his room upstairs, looking out the window. He described her exactly as I had seen her. He rushed inside to check, but no one was there. Even he couldn't explain it. These experiences definitely freak me out, but at the same time, I can't help but be curious. I firmly believe there's something beyond what we understand, especially after everything I've experienced. My mom and sister have never seen anything like I have, but even they sometimes feel the strange energy in our house. I've thought about researching the history of the house, but I'm not sure if it would help. It's not that old, so maybe that's not where the answers lie. When my boyfriend and I moved in together, it was into a second-floor apartment in an old Victorian terrace in a seaside town. The apartment was non-self-contained, which meant that some rooms were separate from the main living area. You'd go up the stairs, and on one floor was the toilet with the bathroom to one side, both open with a key. The next floor had a small kitchen, also locked with a key, and to the right was the actual apartment, which contained a large living area and 2 bedrooms. A bit of an odd setup, but that's England for you. When we first moved in, we didn't have much money. We were both 19 years old, living off cheap meals like pot noodles. Strangely enough, these pot noodles started disappearing. I'd accuse my boyfriend, and he'd accuse me, but neither of us had eaten them, and we were both getting frustrated since we couldn't afford to keep buying more food. It was particularly odd because we were the only ones with keys to all the rooms. After about a week of this, I began to feel like I was being watched. At first, it was just in the kitchen, but soon I started feeling it in the living area as well. It made me a little uneasy, but I tried to brush it off. Then the windows started acting strange. The living room had these huge, heavy sash windows that were difficult to open and close. You had to push up the bottom part of the window to open it, and it would rest above the top part. After a couple of weeks of feeling that strange presence, the windows began slamming shut on their own. Given how heavy they were, it was pretty unsettling. One night, after we'd gone to bed, we were fooling around, tickling each other and laughing. It was my boyfriend's birthday, and his cards were displayed on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. We also had a few candles burning in the room. All of a sudden, my boyfriend got serious and said, "I can feel a presence." I got annoyed, thinking he was just trying to scare me, but as soon as he said it, the cards flew off the mantel and the candles blew out. I know it sounds like a breeze could have done it, but there was no wind. The windows were closed, the evening was calm, and the door to the room was shut. The chimney was even boarded up, so it couldn't have been a draft. The way the cards flew off, it honestly looked like someone had swept them off the mantel with their arm. After that, the presence became stronger for me, though my boyfriend didn't seem to feel it. I would especially sense it when I walked down the stairs to the bathroom level, though not in the bathroom itself. I began to get this strong feeling that it was a female spirit, someone who had been a maid in the house. I don't know why, but I felt like she was jealous of me being with my boyfriend. It was just something I knew in my gut, even though I couldn't explain it. Of course, my boyfriend thought I was losing it. Eventually, I started talking to her. I called her Millie, a name that just came to me, and I'd ask her to please leave us alone. After that, things seemed to settle down, though I could still feel her presence, watching us. We moved out of that apartment after 6 months, the standard tenure for these places, and moved to the very top floor of the building. There was one other apartment between our old one and the top level. The first night we moved in, something strange happened. My boyfriend got really irritated by some loud music playing, but I couldn't hear a thing. He insisted it was clear as day. Music like the kind you'd hear on an old carousel, where the horses go round and round. But try as I might, I couldn't hear a single note. Determined to figure out where the music was coming from, he spoke to the old lady who lived in the apartment below us. She said she had never heard any music but mentioned that the green space in front of the terrace had once been a Victorian park, complete with a carousel and other small fairground attractions. After that, we didn't have any other strange experiences in the top floor apartment, and the feeling of Millie left after we moved upstairs. However, the whole building always had a sense of discomfort about it, especially for me.